The wind arrives first, always first, sliding down from the north where the sky meets the ice in a line so sharp it could cut the world in two. You feel it before you see it, that change in the air that makes your skin tighten and your breath catch somewhere deep in your chest. The summer, brief and bright as a flame cupped in your hands, has already begun to fade from memory, and what remains now is the slow, inevitable descent into cold. You stand at the mouth of the cave, watching the light change across the valley below. The sun hangs lower each day, tracing a shallower arc across the sky, and the shadows grow longer, reaching across the grassland like dark fingers searching for something they will never quite grasp. The herds have begun their movement, the great beasts that sustain your people through the seasons of plenty and the seasons of want. You watch them drift southward, a river of dark shapes flowing across the golden grass, and you know what their departure means. Winter is not merely cold. Winter is the world transformed into something vast and inhospitable, a test written in ice and hunger, and the thin line between survival and silence. You have known 17 winters, perhaps 18. The count grows uncertain after childhood, measured not in numbers but in memories of cold so deep it seemed to live inside your bones, and springs that arrived like miracles, improbable and sweet. Each winter has taught you something. Each winter has taken something. The balance between these two truths is what keeps you alive. Your people have no word for history, no concept that would separate the long ago from the not so long ago in neat, discrete packages. There is only the time before this breath and the time that will come after, and the stories that connect them, stories told in the cave when the wind howls too loud for sleep, stories that carry the knowledge your people have gathered like smooth stones collected from a riverbed, one small piece of survival at a time. The cave behind you extends deep into the hillside, a throat of stone that your family has claimed for longer than anyone can remember. Your grandfather's grandfather once slept where you sleep now, or so the elders say, and his grandfather before that, back through a chain of lives that stretches into a past so distant it becomes almost mythical, almost unreal. But the walls remember. The walls hold the marks your ancestors left, handprints in red ochre, the outlines of animals chased and killed and honored, the simple declaration that says, "We were here, we lived, we continued." The floor of the cave is covered in layers of ash and earth, debris and bones, the compressed archaeology of countless fires, countless meals, countless winters endured. If you were to dig down through those layers, you would be digging through time itself, through the lives of all those who came before, each layer a season, each season a story of survival. But you do not dig. You add. You contribute your own layer to the accumulation, your own fires to warm the stone, your own bones from the animals you hunt to the midden heap that grows slowly at the cave's edge. You are not alone here. No one survives winter alone. Your family numbers 11, your mother, still strong despite the gray threading through her hair, your father, whose right hand bears the scar from a hunting accident 3 winters past, the hand that still grips the spear with undiminished strength, your 2 younger brothers, one barely old enough to hunt, the other still a child who clings to your mother's side when the storms blow hardest, your sister, quiet and watchful, whose hands are always busy with some task, scraping hide, weaving grass, tending the fire, your grandmother, ancient and small, her face a map of wrinkles that deepen when she smiles, which is more often than you would expect from someone who has seen so many winters. And the others, your father's brother and his family, 3 more souls bound to yours by blood and necessity. Together, you are a small tribe within the larger tribe that spreads across this valley and the valleys beyond, groups of 10 or 15 who claim different caves, different hunting grounds, different stretches of river where the fish run thick in summer. Sometimes the groups come together in the warmer months to trade and share stories and arrange marriages, to hunt the largest beasts that require many spears and many hands. But when winter comes, each family retreats to its own shelter, its own stores, its own strategies for survival. The preparation begins now, in these last weeks of autumn when the air grows crisp and the leaves turn colors that seem almost violent in their intensity. Reds and golds and oranges that flame across the hillsides before falling, before dying, before covering the ground in a rustling carpet that will soon be buried beneath snow. Everything you do now is aimed at one singular purpose: to live until spring. You descend from the cave mouth, moving through the grass that reaches to your waist, seed heads heavy and golden in the slanting light. The path to the valley floor is one you know by heart, every stone and root, every place where the earth grows soft after rain. Your feet, wrapped in hide and tied with sinew, find their way without conscious thought, leaving you free to observe, to notice, to gather the information that might mean the difference between comfort and suffering in the months to come. The wind carries smells, earth and grass and the faint musk of animals, the sharper scent of juniper from the grove that grows along the ridgeline, the promise of rain in the moisture that dampens your face. You have learned to read the wind the way others might read tracks in mud, each shift in direction or temperature telling you something about what approaches, what changes, what you might expect in the days ahead. Below, in the valley, your father and uncle are working at the edge of the marsh where the reeds grow thick and tall. You can see them from here, small figures bent to their task, cutting the reeds with stone blades and bundling them into sheaves. Reed is precious in winter. It burns hot and long, better than grass, and can be woven into mats that insulate the cave floor against the cold that rises from the earth. You have already gathered many bundles, stacked them in the deep recess at the back of the cave where they will stay dry. But there can never be enough. Winter is a hungry season, consuming firewood and food with equal indifference. You move toward them, not hurrying. There is a rhythm to this work, to these preparations, that cannot be rushed. Rushing leads to mistakes, to oversights, to the small errors that accumulate into disaster when the snow piles high and the temperature drops so low that water freezes inside its container. That breath becomes visible the moment it leaves your mouth, hanging in the air like a small ghost before dissipating into nothing. Your father looks up as you approach, his face weathered and brown, eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. He nods a small acknowledgement and returns to his cutting. There is no need for words. You take up a position beside him and begin to work, your hands falling into the familiar pattern. Grasp, saw with the blade, cut, lay aside. The reeds are tough and fibrous, resisting the stone edge, but patience overcomes resistance, as it always does. The marsh smells of decay and growth simultaneously, that rich organic scent of things living and dying in close proximity, feeding each other in an endless cycle. Waterfowl move among the reeds, dabbling in the shallow water, fattening themselves for their own journey south. You watch them with a hunter's eye, noting their numbers, their health. There will be time for one more hunt before they leave, one more chance to take a few birds and preserve their meat for winter, to render their fat into fuel for the lamps that will light the cave when darkness comes early and stays late. The sun moves across the sky with the steady, inexorable patience of all celestial things. Your pile of reeds grows. Your back begins to ache from the constant bending, and your hands grow sore where the blade handle presses against the same spot again and again. But you do not stop. Stopping is a luxury that belongs to summer, to the times of plenty when food is abundant and the weather forgiving. Now, as autumn deepens, every hour of daylight is precious, every task essential. When the sun touches the western hills, turning them gold and purple, your father straightens and surveys the bundles you have cut. Enough for today, he says, his voice quiet, almost lost in the whisper of the reeds. We'll carry what we can. You load yourself with as many bundles as you can carry, the reeds scratching against your arms and neck, and begin the climb back to the cave. Your father and uncle follow, each bearing their own loads, moving in single file along the narrow path. This is also part of the rhythm. Work, carry, store, return. Again and again, building the reserves that will sustain you through the frozen months. By the time you reach the cave, the sun has set, leaving only a wash of deep blue light that makes everything appear soft and slightly unreal. The fire inside the cave is already burning, tended by your mother and sister, and the smell of cooking meat drifts out to greet you. Something killed earlier today, a young deer your father brought down with a well-placed spear, its body already butchered and divided, every part utilized or stored or set aside for some specific purpose. You stack the reeds with the others and move toward the fire, drawn by its warmth and light. The cave's interior flickers with shadows that dance across the stone walls, making the ancient handprints seem to move, seem almost alive. Your family gathers around the fire as they do every evening, a circle of faces lit from below, eyes reflecting the flames. Your grandmother is telling a story, her voice thin but steady, rising and falling with the practiced cadence of someone who has told this story many times before. It is a story about winter, about the great cold that came when she was young, a cold so severe that the river froze solid and the snow reached the height of a man's chest, and several families did not survive to see the spring. But we did, she says, her eyes finding each of you in turn. We survived because we remembered. We remembered to share when sharing meant life. We remembered to prepare when preparation seemed excessive. We remembered that winter is not our enemy. Winter simply is, and we must be clever enough to exist within it. You listen to her words as you have listened before, and you understand that this too is preparation, this storing of knowledge and wisdom, this passing of experience from one generation to the next. Your grandmother survived that terrible winter because someone taught her how, and she is teaching you now, in this moment, around this fire, so that when your own terrible winter comes, you will have the knowledge you need to survive it. The meat is tender, cooked slowly over the coals, and you eat your portion slowly, savoring it, knowing that such meals will become less frequent as winter deepens and the stores must be rationed more carefully. There is no waste. What you cannot eat now will be dried or smoked or frozen in the ice that forms in the shadowed spaces behind the cave, nature's cold storage, reliable and constant. After the meal, your mother brings out the hides that need working. Deer and rabbit, and one from a boar killed last week, its skin thick and tough. Working hide is endless labor, scraping away the fat and membrane, treating it with a mixture of brain matter and plant oils, working it soft and supple. But hide properly prepared is warmth. Hide is the barrier between your skin and the wind, between life and death when the temperature plummets. You take up a scraper and begin to work one of the rabbit skins, stretched taut on its frame. The motion is repetitive, meditative, your mind free to wander while your hands perform their task. You think about the coming winter, trying to imagine it, though you know that each winter is different, each one bringing its own particular challenges and hardships. You cannot predict which storms will be worst, how deep the snow will pile, how long the cold will last. You can only prepare as well as possible and then endure. Your younger brother, the one who is learning to hunt, comes to sit beside you. His name is a sound that means quick water, given to him because he was born during the spring floods, when the river ran wild and fast. He is eager, too eager sometimes, wanting to prove himself capable, wanting to be seen as a man rather than a boy. How many winters until it becomes easier? He asks, his voice low enough that only you can hear. You pause in your scraping, considering the question. It doesn't become easier, you say finally. You become stronger. That's different. He absorbs this, his young face serious in the firelight. You remember being his age, remember the same impatience to be grown, to be capable, to be trusted with the responsibilities that came with adulthood. But you also remember the fear that came with those first winters when you truly understood what was at stake, when you realized that survival was not guaranteed, that people you knew and loved could simply vanish between autumn and spring, claimed by cold or hunger or accident. You'll be fine, you add more gently. You're learning. That's what matters. He nods and returns to his own task, working a bone all through a piece of hide, creating the holes that will allow it to be sewn into a garment. His hands are clumsy still, but growing more skilled with each attempt. By the time the deep winter arrives, he will be competent enough, capable enough. He will survive. The fire burns lower as the night deepens, and one by one your family members roll themselves into their sleeping furs, finding their spots on the cave floor, forming the close huddle that conserves heat and provides comfort. You remain awake longer than most, keeping watch on the fire, adding wood when needed, making sure the flames never die completely. Outside, the wind has picked up, whistling around the cave mouth, carrying with it the first hints of the storms to come. You can feel the temperature dropping, feel the season turning like a great wheel, unstoppable and indifferent. But inside the cave, with your family breathing quietly around you, with the fire casting its warm light against the ancient walls, you feel something else. Not safety, exactly, for true safety does not exist in this world, but something close to it. Purpose. Belonging. The knowledge that you are part of a chain that stretches back into the unimaginable past and forward into an equally uncertain future. You add another piece of wood to the fire and watch the flames catch, spreading across the dry bark, transforming solid matter into light and heat. This is the alchemy that has kept your species alive through countless winters, this ability to make fire, to create warmth where none exists, to push back the darkness and the cold with nothing but wood and ember and breath. The handprints on the wall seem to watch you, those ancient declarations of presence. You think about the people who made them, people like you, people who face the same winters, the same challenges, the same fundamental question. How do we survive this? And they did survive it. The proof is in your own existence, in the blood that runs through your veins, carrying the genetic legacy of every single one of your ancestors who lived long enough to reproduce, who survived every winter and every danger and every hardship that life threw at them. You are the culmination of thousands of successful winters, Thousands of moments where someone made the right choice, gathered the right supplies, told the right story, passed down the right knowledge. This thought brings you comfort as you finally lie down in your own furs, as you let your eyes close and your breathing slow. You are not alone in this. You have never been alone. You carry with you the accumulated wisdom of all those who came before, and you will pass it forward to all those who come after. The fire crackles softly. The wind howls outside, and you drift into sleep, secure in the knowledge that you have done today what needed doing, that you are as prepared as you can be, that tomorrow you will wake and continue the work, the endless necessary work of survival. The cave holds you all, as it has held so many before you, a stone womb that shelters you from the harshest elements, that keeps the wind and snow at bay, that allows you this small space of warmth in a world that is preparing to freeze. Morning will come, and with it more work, more preparation, more steps along the path toward winter's heart. But for now, there is only this, breath and warmth and the quiet presence of family, the steady rhythm of hearts beating in the darkness, proof that life continues, that it persists, that it endures. And somewhere in the north, the ice waits, patient and inevitable, beginning its slow march southward, bringing with it the cold that will test you, that will test everything, that will ask the same question it has always asked. Are you strong enough? Are you prepared enough? Are you worthy of spring? You will find out soon enough. Winter is coming, as it always does, and you must be ready. You have learned to read the sky now, in ways your ancestors taught without words, through gestures and patience, and the slow opening of awareness that comes only when survival depends on seeing what others might miss. The clouds that gather on the northern horizon carry a weight you can feel in your chest before the first flakes fall. A pressure that builds behind your eyes and makes the old wound in your shoulder ache with the memory of winters past. You stand at the mouth of the cave as dawn breaks pale and reluctant over the valley, and you know, with a certainty that lives deeper than thought, that the cold is coming again, that the earth is preparing to test you once more, that everything you and your people have done since the last thaw has been preparation for this moment, when the world turns white and still and utterly unforgiving. The cave behind you breathes with the warmth of bodies, 23 souls who depend on the knowledge you carry, the skills your hands remember, the stories that have been passed down through generations like precious stones worn smooth by countless tellings. You are not the oldest among your people, but you have survived more winters than most, and this has made you a keeper of essential knowledge, a bridge between the memory of elders who have passed into the earth and the children who must learn if they are to see another spring. Your father taught you to watch the behavior of animals in autumn, the thickness of fur on the horses that graze the steppes, the urgency with which squirrels gather their stores, the early departure of birds who once lingered until the first frost. This season, the signs have been unmistakable. The reindeer moved south 2 full moons earlier than last year, their herds tight and purposeful, led by does who seemed to sense something in the air that even you could not yet name. The bears you tracked to their dens in the hills had accumulated fat like you had never seen, their bodies swollen with the desperate feeding of animals who know, in their blood and bones, that the coming cold will be severe. You turn back into the cave, your eyes adjusting to the dimness, to the familiar geography of shadows and smoke-darkened stone that has been your people's winter home for longer than the oldest stories remember. The fire in the central hearth burns low but steady, fed by the careful hands of those who understand that flame is life, that the embers must never fully die, that even in the deepest cold there must be this small sun around which all existence revolves. The cave extends back into darkness, a series of chambers that your people have learned to use with the efficiency born of necessity. The main gallery where you stand is the heart of your winter world, large enough to hold everyone when the storms rage outside, high enough that smoke rises naturally toward fissures in the ceiling that carry it away into the upper darkness. The walls bear the marks of countless winters, soot stains that climb toward the ceiling like dark water, the worn smoothness of stone where bodies have leaned and slept for generations, the shallow depressions where tools have been sharpened against rock until the surface itself has been shaped by the repetition of survival. Your daughter sits near the fire, working a piece of hide with a scraper made from flint, her movements practiced and rhythmic, the soft whisper of stone against leather a sound as familiar as breathing. She is 15 winters old, on the threshold of adulthood, and she has been learning the essential skills with the fierce concentration of someone who understands what ignorance costs in a world that forgives no mistakes. Beside her, your son, only 9 winters, practices the knots that bind sinew to bone, that secure hides to frames, that hold together the fragile constructions of human ingenuity against wind and weight and time. His small fingers work with surprising dexterity, though he must stop frequently to examine the example you made for him, a complex weaving of cord that can be pulled tight with a single motion or released with another. He looks up as you approach, his face open and trusting in the firelight, and you feel the weight of that trust like a stone in your chest, the responsibility of keeping him alive through what is coming, of teaching him enough that he might someday teach his own children. The elders sit in their customary place, near the fire but not too close, wrapped in layers of fur and hide that give them the appearance of ancient, patient stones. Tall Reed, the oldest among you, has seen more than 60 winters, a span of time so vast it seems almost impossible, a defiance of all the forces that work constantly to return human flesh to the earth from which it came. His hands are gnarled like old roots, his face a topography of wrinkles that map a lifetime of squinting into wind and sun. But his eyes remain sharp, and his memory holds knowledge that exists nowhere else in the world. He nods to you as you pass, a small acknowledgement that carries with it the transfer of responsibility, the silent understanding that leadership in winter is not about power, but about service, about making decisions that may determine who lives and who returns to the earth before spring comes again. You have been preparing for this winter since the last snow melted and the first green shoots pushed through the mud of the valley floor. Every decision, every action, every moment of labor has been oriented toward this single imperative: survival through the coldest months. The work has been constant, demanding, a choreography of seasonal tasks that your people have refined over countless generations. In spring, as the world came back to life, you gathered the first plants, the tender shoots rich with vitality that helped restore bodies weakened by winter's deprivation. You repaired the tools that had been damaged or worn during the cold months, knapping new blades from flint, straightening spear shafts over fire, replacing the bindings that held stone to wood. You tracked the herds as they moved north, following the greening land, and you took what you needed, always with the awareness that waste is a form of disrespect, that every animal gives its life so that yours might continue, and this exchange demands honor, gratitude, precision. Summer brought abundance and urgency in equal measure, a brief window of warmth when the living was easier, but the work was no less essential. You hunted with your brothers, tracking deer through forests thick with life, bringing down a young auroch at the edge of the marshlands, its massive body yielding meat and hide and bone and sinew, everything useful, nothing wasted. The women and children gathered berries and roots and seeds, their knowledge of plants as deep and essential as your knowledge of animals, their hands staining purple with fruit, their backs aching from the constant bending and reaching and carrying. You all smoked meat over carefully tended fires, the thin strips hanging like leather curtains inside the cave, the smell of smoke and fat and preservation filling the air for weeks. You rendered fat and stored it in cleaned intestines, sealed with pine resin, precious reserves of concentrated energy for the weeks when fresh food would be impossible to find. You gathered nuts, thousands and thousands of them, cracking and sorting and storing them in hide bags placed in the coolest, driest parts of the cave where moisture would not rot them before they were needed. Autumn intensified the work, brought a sharpness to every task, a knowing that time was running short. You cut and stacked firewood, vast quantities of it, more than seemed possible to burn. But experience had taught you that the cold could stretch on longer than any estimate, that running out of fuel meant death as surely as running out of food. You selected wood with care: birch that burned hot and clean, oak that burned long and steady, pine for kindling, and for the resinous smoke that helped preserve meat and keep insects away. You weathered the wood when you could, choosing fallen branches and standing dead wood that had already given up much of its moisture, because green would burn poorly and filled the cave with smoke that stung eyes and lungs. You carried the wood in bundles on your back, climbing the slope to the cave again and again, your shoulders aching, your hands rough and splintered, but the pile growing, slowly but steadily, until it filled the side chamber you designated for fuel, stacked carefully to allow air to flow between the pieces, to keep it dry and ready. You reinforced the entrance of the cave, constructing a wind barrier from branches and hides, a flexible wall that could be adjusted depending on the direction of the storm, that broke the worst of the wind's force while still allowing smoke to escape. You had learned through trial and error, through winters when mistakes taught harsh lessons, that air must flow, that sealing the cave completely led to suffocation, to the slow poisoning of too much smoke and too little freshness, to mornings when people woke with crushing headaches and a vague nausea that spoke of the air itself becoming hostile. The balance was delicate. Enough protection to preserve warmth, enough opening to sustain life. You experimented with different configurations, watching how smoke moved in various winds, how cold penetrated through gaps, how the fire drew oxygen, and where it pulled that oxygen from. You learned slowly, through observation and adjustment and the accumulation of experience, to create a space that could sustain life even when the world outside became actively lethal. The collection of bedding materials became its own sustained effort, a task that involved everyone who could walk. You gathered dried grasses by the armload, cutting them with stone blades, binding them into bundles that you carried back to the cave in a steady stream throughout the late summer and early autumn. You collected bracken and fern, dried moss and pine boughs, anything that could provide insulation from the stone floor, that could trap air and warmth between bodies and the cold ground that would otherwise leach away heat as surely as if you slept in a stream. You tested different materials, learned which ones compressed too quickly under weight, which ones held their loft, which ones attracted insects or moisture, or became uncomfortable with use. You created sleeping platforms in tiers, knowing that warm air rose, that those who slept higher would be warmer, and you assigned positions with the needs of each person in mind. The very young and very old higher up, those who could tolerate cold lower down, hunters who would need to rise early near the entrance where they could leave without waking others. The hides you had collected became a form of wealth, a measure of preparation and future warmth. You tanned them with the brains and liver of the animals they came from, working the tissue into the skin until it became soft and pliable, then smoking them to make them water-resistant, able to shed snow and rain rather than absorbing moisture that would freeze and crack. Each hide represented hours of labor, the scraping away of fat and tissue, the careful treatment that prevented rot, the stretching and working that prevented stiffening, the smoking that gave them their final durability. You had dozens of them now, stacked in a dry chamber, organized by size and quality and purpose. The heavy auroch hide for the wind barrier, the deer hides for clothing and bedding, the rabbit skins sewn together into blankets light enough for children to carry but warm beyond what their size would suggest, the fur of wolves and foxes for the lining of boots and hoods, for the extra layer that would mean the difference between frostbite and survival when the coldest days came. Clothing became a constant project, a continuous work of maintenance and creation. You wore layers, understanding that trapped air insulates better than any single thick garment, that the ability to adjust your covering to match your level of activity prevented the dangerous accumulation of sweat that would later freeze against your skin. You made inner layers from soft rabbit skin, the fur against your body, the warmth immediate and light. You made middle layers from deer hide, heavier, treated to be wind-resistant, overlapping like scales to shed moisture. You made outer layers from the thickest hides, reinforced at shoulders and knees and elbows, where was constant, where a tear could admit killing cold. You paid special attention to hands and feet, to heads and faces, knowing that extremities froze first, that losing fingers or toes was not only agonizing but permanently debilitating, that those who could not use their hands could not work, could not contribute, became dependents in a world where everyone's labor was essential. You fashioned mittens rather than gloves, understanding that fingers kept together shared warmth more effectively than fingers separated, even though mittens sacrificed dexterity. You designed them with long cuffs that overlapped with sleeves, preventing gaps where cold could penetrate. You added drawstrings that could be pulled tight, sealing the opening. You created loops that attached the mittens to your coat, ensuring you could remove them briefly for tasks requiring finger work without losing them in snow or wind. For your feet, you constructed boots from the leg skins of deer, the natural shape already close to what you needed, sewn with sinew thread that would not rot, stuffed with dried grass for insulation, wrapped at the calves with leather thongs that could be adjusted as needed. You treated the soles with extra fat, rubbing it in until the leather became somewhat waterproof, knowing that wet feet in winter were an invitation to injury, that the cold worked its way into the body most efficiently through contact with frozen ground. The children needed special attention, their smaller bodies losing heat more quickly, their metabolism not yet efficient at maintaining core temperature, their awareness not yet sharp enough to notice the early signs of cold injury before damage was done. You made their clothing with extra layers, with closures that they could not accidentally open, with hoods that covered everything but their eyes, leaving no skin exposed to wind that could freeze flesh in moments during the worst storms. You taught them to recognize the sensation of numbness, to report it immediately, to never ignore the pain of returning circulation because pain meant damage was still reversible, while absence of pain often meant tissue had died. You taught them to keep moving when outside, to never sit directly on snow or frozen ground, to watch each other for the white patches on cheeks or nose that signaled the beginning of frostbite, to come immediately to adults when they noticed such signs rather than trying to manage alone. The psychological preparation was as essential as the physical, though less tangible, harder to measure. You knew from experience that winter tested the mind as much as the body, that the confinement of the cave, the darkness, the cold that made every venture outside a calculated risk, the monotony of days that blended into one another without clear distinction, all of this pressed against the spirit in ways that could break people as surely as hunger or cold. You had seen it in previous winters. The withdrawal into silence, the irritability that flared into arguments over trivial matters, the listlessness that made even necessary tasks feel impossible, the despair that sometimes crept in during the darkest weeks when the sun barely rose above the horizon and the cold seemed eternal. So you prepared stories, reinforced traditions, planned activities that would give shape to the shapeless time. You knew the long narratives that your father had taught you, tales that took many nights to complete, that involved journeys and challenges and cleverness rewarded, that carried within them the wisdom of generations and the comfort of repetition. You planned competitions and games that could be conducted in the limited space of the cave, tests of skill and memory and dexterity that would give people goals beyond mere survival, reasons to excel, opportunities for laughter. You reinforced the rituals that marked time, the small ceremonies that acknowledged the phases of the moon, the shortest day, the first hints of returning light, giving structure to what could otherwise feel like an endless, undifferentiated darkness. You gathered the people together on the evening before the first snow was expected to fall, calling them to the fire with the particular whistle that meant assembly, that brought everyone from their various tasks to the central hearth. They came slowly, in groups and pairs and alone, settling into their customary places around the flames, the children automatically moving to sit in front where they could see and hear clearly, the adults arranging themselves in the comfortable patterns of long familiarity. You waited until everyone was settled, until the conversations had died down and faces turned toward you expectantly, until the only sounds were the pop and hiss of the fire and the soft whisper of wind at the cave entrance. You spoke then, your voice pitched to carry without shouting, the tone measured and calm, conveying confidence without arrogance, awareness of danger without panic. You told them what they already knew but needed to hear stated plainly, that the signs pointed to a hard winter, that the preparations had been thorough, that survival would require everyone's effort and discipline and cooperation. You reviewed the rules that governed winter life, the protocols that had been developed over countless cold seasons, the fire watch rotation, ensuring that someone was always tending the flames, adding fuel before it was needed, maintaining the consistent warmth that was the heart of everything. The food rationing system, which parceled out supplies in measured amounts, preventing the human tendency to eat more when food was visible, ensuring that stores lasted until spring no matter how long winter extended. The hygiene practices that prevented the spread of illness in close quarters, the designated areas for waste, the regular airing of bedding when weather permitted, the isolation of anyone showing signs of sickness. You spoke about the buddy system for venturing outside, the absolute rule that no one left the cave alone during storms, that every expedition had a purpose and a time limit, and someone in the cave who knew where they had gone and when to expect their return. You explained again the signals for different situations, the calls that meant danger, that meant lost, that meant injured, that meant return immediately. You demonstrated the proper way to dress for outside work, the layering sequence, the checking of all fastenings, the covering of all exposed skin. You showed the children one more time how to recognize the early signs of cold injury in themselves and others, making them repeat back to you what they should do, ensuring the knowledge was fresh and clear. Tall Reed spoke after you, his voice thin but steady, carrying the authority of all his accumulated winters. He told a story about a winter from his youth, before you were born, when the cold came early and stayed late, when the snow drifted higher than a man could reach, when they had exhausted their food supplies and survived only by melting snow to drink and huddling together for warmth, slowly consuming the leather of their spare boots and clothing, waiting for a break in the weather that finally came just as the weakest among them were beginning to slip away. He told the story not to frighten but to remind, to give context, to make clear that what you faced was serious but survivable, that others had endured worse and lived to become elders who taught the next generation. The women spoke then, the senior among them, Grey Dove, whose knowledge of plants and healing was as deep as your knowledge of hunting. She reviewed the medicines they had prepared, the remedies for common winter ailments. The tea from willow bark that eased pain and reduced fever, the poultices of herbs and fat that could be applied to chilblains and frostbite, the dried berries rich in the vitality that prevented the bleeding sickness that sometimes afflicted people in late winter when fresh food had been absent for months. She spoke about the importance of eating the organ meats, the liver and kidneys and heart, which carried concentrated nutrients that muscle meat lacked. She reminded everyone to chew the sinews and softer bones, to extract every bit of nourishment from what you had, to waste nothing, because waste in winter was not merely careless but potentially fatal. The fire burned lower as the meeting extended into the night, and you fed it carefully, watching the flames reshape themselves around the new wood, seeing in their dance something ancient and essential, this partnership between human and fire that had made survival in cold climates possible. Without fire, your people could not exist here, could not endure the winters that turned this land into a test that only the most adaptable could pass. Fire was technology and comfort and safety and spirit, all bound together in the mystery of combustion, in the alchemy that turned wood into heat and light and smoke, that kept the darkness at bay, that made the cave a haven rather than merely a shelter. You thought about the generations who had sat around fires in this very cave, who had faced the same fears and preparations, who had told the same stories and enforced the same disciplines, who had survived or failed based on their knowledge and their luck and their capacity to endure. You felt connected to them across time, felt their presence in the smoke-darkened walls, in the worn smoothness of stone, in the accumulated wisdom that had been passed down to you and that you were now passing forward. This continuity was itself a form of survival, a way of defeating death by ensuring that what was learned was not lost, that each generation started not from the beginning, but from the high-water mark of all previous knowledge. The children began to yawn, their heads drooping, and parents gathered them up, carrying the smallest, leading the others toward the sleeping area where their beds had been prepared, where furs and hides and dried grass created warm nests that would shelter them through the night. You watched them go, feeling the weight of responsibility settle more heavily on your shoulders, the knowledge that their safety depended on decisions you and the other adults would make in the coming months, that mistakes would be paid for not in abstraction but in cold and hunger and possibly death. You remained by the fire after most had retired, sitting with Tall Reed and a few others who were not yet ready for sleep, who seemed to want the companionship of quiet presence, the comfort of not being alone with thoughts of what was coming. The fire settled into coals, glowing red and orange and occasionally white where the heat was most intense, radiating warmth that you could feel on your face and hands, a warmth that made the cold beyond the cave entrance seem even more absolute by contrast. Tall Reed spoke quietly, more to himself than to you, remembering other winters, other preparations, speaking in fragments that required you to fill in the gaps, to understand from context what he meant. He talked about the winter when his daughter died, when she was still a child, when a sudden fever took her despite all the remedies they tried, how they had waited until spring to take her body to the burial ground because the frozen earth could not be worked, how they kept her at the back of the cave where it was coldest, wrapped in furs, and how he visited her every day through that long winter, speaking to her as if she could still hear, until the thaw finally came and he could give her to the earth with the proper ceremonies. You listened, offering no platitudes, knowing that some griefs cannot be comforted, only witnessed, only held in the silence of shared humanity. You understood that he was telling you this not to burden you, but to prepare you, to remind you that winter always took someone, that death was as much a part of the seasonal cycle as snow and thaw, that leadership meant carrying the weight of loss and continuing anyway, meant making decisions knowing that some might fail, meant living with consequences that could break your heart. The fire dimmed further, and you added one more piece of wood, not large, just enough to keep the coals alive until the first watch took over, maintaining the continuity of flame that was the central discipline of winter life. The wood caught slowly, reluctantly, thin flames licking along its length, finding purchase, growing, beginning the process of transformation that would release the energy the tree had captured from sunlight during its years of growth, giving that energy back now as heat and light when you needed it most. You thought about the first people who learned to make fire, who tamed it and kept it and discovered all the ways it could serve human needs, who who made the leap from using fire they found to creating fire themselves, striking sparks from stone, coaxing embers from friction, transforming the world through this mastery. Everything your people could do in this harsh land depended on that ancient discovery, on the accumulated knowledge of fire management that allowed you to carry this small sun with you wherever you went, to establish warmth in the coldest places, to push back the night and the cold and the predators that hunted in darkness. You stood finally, your joints stiff from sitting, and made your way to your own sleeping place, where your mate had already arranged the furs, where your children slept with the absolute abandon of the young, trusting completely in your ability to keep them safe. You lay down carefully, trying not to wake anyone, pulling the furs over yourself, feeling their weight and warmth settle around you like an embrace. Through the cave entrance, you could see the night sky, clear and dense with stars, the kind of sky that preceded the coldest weather, when the absence of clouds allowed heat to radiate away into the vastness of space, leaving the earth to freeze beneath an indifferent cosmos. But you were not afraid, not exactly, though you felt the appropriate respect for what was coming, the healthy caution that kept people alive. You had prepared as thoroughly as knowledge and effort allowed, had marshaled the resources and organized the people, and established the practices that gave you the best chance of seeing spring again. The rest was beyond your control, subject to the whims of weather and the unpredictable turns of fortune. And there was a strange peace in that, a release from the burden of believing you could master everything, an acceptance that you could only do your best and then endure whatever came. Sleep took you slowly, your mind gradually releasing its grip on plans and worries, your breathing deepening, your body relaxing into the warmth of furs and family. And in the last moments before consciousness faded, you heard the first whisper of wind changing direction, bringing with it the smell of snow, the particular silence that preceded a storm, the sense that the world was holding its breath before the cold descended in earnest. And you knew, even as sleep claimed you, that when you woke, winter would have begun. You wake before dawn, though you cannot see the sky from where you lie, wrapped in the layered furs that have become as familiar to you as your own skin. The darkness inside the cave is absolute, a kind of blackness that feels solid, that presses against your eyelids even when they are open. You have learned to navigate this darkness, to read its textures and temperatures, to know where the wall curves inward, and where the floor slopes toward the passage that leads deeper into the earth. Your body has mapped this space through repetition, through the slow accumulation of small movements repeated night after night, and now your muscles remember what your eyes cannot see. The cold has changed in the hours since you last felt it consciously. During the night, while you drifted through dreams populated by images of summer grasses and the fat bodies of animals grazing in sunlight, the temperature dropped further still. You can feel this drop not as a sudden shock, but as a gradual tightening, a drawing in of warmth from the extremities of the cave toward its core, where the bodies of your family and your people create a collective heat that radiates outward in diminishing waves. Your breath, when you exhale slowly through your nose, carries moisture that hangs briefly in the air before you. Invisible but tangible, a small cloud of warmth that dissipates into the greater cold surrounding you. You shift slightly beneath the furs, careful not to disturb the arrangement that has taken so long to perfect. The bottom layer, against the stone floor, is made from the thick hide of an aurochs, a massive creature that fell to the combined effort of 12 hunters 3 winters ago. You were among them, though younger then, less certain of your place in the coordinated dance of pursuit and encirclement that brought the animal down. The hide still bears the scars of that hunt, small tears and punctures that have been mended with sinew thread, and when you run your fingers across its surface in the darkness, you can trace these repairs like a story written in a language older than words. Above the aurochs hide lie other furs, each one selected for specific properties that contribute to the layered system of insulation that keeps you alive through nights when the cold outside could stop your heart in the time it takes to count your fingers. There is wolf fur, dense and oily, that repels moisture and holds heat close to your body. There is the fur of rabbits, soft and light, that traps air in countless tiny pockets between the fine hairs. There is deerskin, supple and durable, that serves as an outer shell to protect the more delicate furs beneath. These layers are not random. They represent accumulated knowledge passed down through generations, refined through countless winters, adjusted and readjusted until the arrangement achieves something close to perfection. You lie still for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the cave around you. To your left, you can hear the deep, steady breathing of your father, a rhythm so familiar that its absence would wake you instantly. To your right, closer, Your younger sister shifts in her sleep, making a small sound in her throat, half dream and half discomfort from some minor ache or cramp. Further away, toward the mouth of the cave where the watchfire burns low through the night, you hear the occasional crack and pop of wood settling in the coals, and beneath that, if you listen very carefully, the faint whisper of wind moving past the entrance, testing the barriers that have been erected there to keep the worst of the cold at bay. The darkness begins to thin, though this change is so gradual that you cannot point to the moment when it begins. It is not that light appears, exactly, but rather that the quality of the darkness shifts, becoming less absolute, acquiring texture and depth. You can begin to distinguish shapes now, vague outlines that resolve themselves slowly into the familiar geography of your winter home. The curve of the ceiling overhead, blackened by smoke from countless fires. The heap of supplies against the far wall, carefully organized and covered with additional hides to protect against moisture and the occasional curious rodent. The huddled forms of sleeping bodies, each one wrapped in their own cocoon of furs, scattered across the floor of the cave in a pattern that appears random, but is actually quite deliberate, positioned to maximize shared warmth while maintaining enough space for air to circulate. You push back the furs slowly, letting the cold air touch your face first, then your neck and shoulders. The shock of it is immediate, but not unbearable. Your body has adapted to this cycle of warmth and cold, the constant negotiation between the two states that defines winter survival. Your skin tightens, and you feel the small hairs on your arms stand up, an ancient response that no longer serves much purpose but persists nonetheless, a reminder of a time when your ancestors were covered in thick pelts of their own. You sit up carefully, mindful of the low ceiling. The cave is not large, and in winter, when everyone crowds together for warmth, the space feels even smaller. But this compression of bodies and heat is not a hardship. It is a strategy, a deliberate choice that turns limitation into advantage. You have learned to find comfort in proximity, to accept the sounds and smells of other human bodies as part of the texture of winter life. There is intimacy in this arrangement, a breaking down of the boundaries that exist in warmer seasons when people can spread out, can claim individual spaces and maintain distance. You move toward the fire, stepping carefully over sleeping forms, your feet finding the clear paths through memory and practice. The fire has burned down to coals, glowing red beneath a layer of gray ash, but it is not out. It will never be allowed to go out, not in winter, not when the cold outside is strong enough to kill. The person on watch, you can see now that it is your uncle, sitting cross-legged near the entrance, wrapped in a heavy bearskin, has tended the fire through the night, adding small pieces of wood at intervals calculated to maintain the coals without producing too much smoke or consuming wood too quickly. Your uncle nods to you as you approach, a minimal gesture of acknowledgement. His face, in the dim red glow of the coals, looks carved from stone, all sharp angles and deep shadows. He is older than your father, though you do not know by how many years. Age is not measured here in the precise counting of seasons, but in the accumulation of experience, in the depth of knowledge, in the quality of judgment. Your uncle has survived more winters than almost anyone in the group, and this survival has earned him a place of respect, a voice that carries weight in discussions and decisions. You crouch beside the fire, extending your hands toward the warmth that radiates from the coals. The heat on your palms is immediate and intense, almost painful after the cold of sleep. You hold your hands there anyway, letting the warmth penetrate your skin, feeling it travel up your arms and into your chest. This is one of the small rituals that structure winter days, these moments of deliberate warming, the conscious gathering of heat into your body before facing the tasks that require you to venture away from the fire's immediate sphere. Your uncle reaches beside him and lifts a flat stone from the edge of the fire pit. On the stone, wrapped in leaves, is a portion of meat that has been warming slowly through the night. He unwraps it carefully. The leaves are precious, saved and reused many times, and breaks the meat in half, offering you one portion. You accept it with both hands, feeling the warmth of it before you even bring it to your mouth. The meat is tough, stringy, the flesh of an animal that was itself lean and hard-muscled, adapted to winter survival. But it is nourishing, and you chew it slowly, extracting every bit of nutrition, swallowing the fibers that refuse to break down, wasting nothing. You eat in silence, as does your uncle. This is not an uncomfortable silence, but a companionable one. The shared quiet of early morning when the day has not yet announced its intentions and the mind is still partially wrapped in the soft fog of sleep. You watch the coals pulse and fade, pulse and fade, responding to imperceptible currents of air that move through the cave. Each glowing point is a small sun, a concentrated sphere of heat and light that pushes back against the darkness and cold that are the cave's natural state. When the meat is gone, your uncle speaks, his voice low and rough from hours of silence. "The wind changed in the night," he says, and you understand immediately what this means. The wind direction determines which passages in the cave system will draw smoke out most effectively, which areas will be warmest, where cold air will pool and need to be avoided. You have learned to read the wind like a language, to interpret its shifts and changes as signals that inform dozens of small decisions throughout each day. You nod, acknowledging this information, filing it away with all the other small observations that will shape your actions. You rise, moving toward the back of the cave where the water containers are stored. These are leather bags, carefully treated and sealed, filled with snow that has been brought inside and allowed to melt slowly. The water is cold, almost cold enough to hurt your teeth, but you drink deeply, feeling it travel down your throat and into your stomach, a spreading coolness that is different from the external cold, more tolerable, almost refreshing. Others are beginning to wake now. You can hear the rustling of furs, the small sounds of bodies shifting and stretching, the quiet murmurs of voices as people greet each other and assess the morning. The cave is coming alive in its slow, gradual way, like an organism rousing itself from dormancy, each part waking in sequence, the collective consciousness reassembling itself from the fragments of individual sleep. You return to your sleeping area and begin the process of rolling and securing your furs. This is important work, not to be rushed or done carelessly. The furs must be shaken out to remove any moisture that has accumulated overnight from your breath and body heat. They must be inspected for damage, for any small tears or weak spots that could worsen if not addressed immediately. They must be folded in a specific way that prevents creasing and maintains the loft of the fur, the thickness that provides insulation. All of this you do with practiced efficiency, your hands moving through the motions while your mind begins to consider the day ahead. The plan, as discussed the previous evening, is to check the trap line that extends along the creek bed to the east. This is a journey of perhaps 2 hours in good conditions, but conditions are rarely good in deep winter. The snow will be deep in places, crusted and treacherous in others. The temperature will be brutal, especially if the wind that changed in the night has brought clear skies, which means no cloud cover to hold in what little warmth the earth retains. But the traps must be checked. They represent one of the most reliable sources of food in winter, and any animal that has been caught must be retrieved before other predators find it, or before the cold preserves it so thoroughly that it becomes unusable, frozen solid, and impossible to process. You will not go alone. This is understood without need for discussion. Winter travel is always undertaken in groups of at least 2, preferably 3 or more. The reasons for this are so fundamental, so deeply embedded in survival practice, that they require no explanation. If one person falls through ice, another can pull them out. If one person becomes disoriented in blowing snow, another can maintain the bearing. If one person is injured, another can provide assistance or go for help. The mathematics of winter survival are unforgiving, and they always favor numbers, favor redundancy, favor the distribution of risk across multiple bodies. You look across the cave and catch the eye of your cousin, a young man near your own age who has accompanied you on countless such expeditions. He nods, a minimal gesture that communicates agreement and readiness. He is already preparing his own gear, pulling on the additional layers that will be necessary for extended exposure to the cold. You do the same, working methodically through the sequence of garments that have been developed over generations to protect human flesh from temperatures that were never meant to accommodate it. First, the inner layer, a shirt and leggings made from soft rabbit fur, worn with the fur against your skin. The sensation is strange at first, slightly uncomfortable, but you have grown accustomed to it. This layer creates a warm microclimate directly against your body, trapping heat before it can escape. Over this goes a second layer of heavier fur, wolf or fox, worn with the fur facing outward. This layer provides additional insulation and begins to create the bulk that will protect you from the wind. Then comes a tunic of thick leather, treated with animal fat to make it wind-resistant, and over that, finally, a large cape of bearskin that drapes over your shoulders and can be pulled tight around your body, secured with toggles made from carved bone. Your hands and feet require special attention. You wrap your feet first in strips of soft hide, then in packed moss that has been dried near the fire, then in outer boots made from several layers of treated leather and fur, bound tight with leather thongs. The boots are not elegant, but they are effective, creating so much insulation between your feet and the frozen ground that you can walk for hours without losing sensation in your toes. Your hands you cover with mittens rather than gloves, keeping your fingers together to share warmth. The mittens are made from the fur of Arctic hare, impossibly soft and dense, and you have sewn an additional outer shell of leather to protect them from wear. Around your face you wrap a scarf made from fox fur, covering your nose and mouth, leaving only your eyes exposed. This serves multiple purposes. It warms the air before it enters your lungs, preventing the sharp pain that comes from breathing deeply in extreme cold. It protects the skin of your face from frostbite, and it traps some of the moisture from your breath, preventing it from freezing on your eyebrows and eyelashes, which can happen surprisingly quickly when the temperature drops far enough. Thus prepared, you look like something other than human, like a creature made entirely of fur and leather, massive and shapeless. But this transformation is necessary. In this form, you can venture out into conditions that would kill your naked body in minutes. In this form, you become something that can negotiate with winter, can make a temporary truce with the cold, can move through the frozen landscape and return alive. Your cousin is similarly transformed, and together you move toward the entrance of the cave. Others are preparing to go out as well, but on different errands. A small group is gathering to collect more firewood from the cache that was established in the fall, stacked and covered at strategic points within reasonable distance of the winter camp. Another pair is planning to check the larger game traps further to the north. Winter strategy involves spreading effort across multiple resources, never depending too heavily on any single source, maintaining a diverse portfolio of opportunities. At the cave entrance, you pause. This threshold is not merely a physical boundary, but a psychological one, a transition point between the relative safety and warmth of the interior and the hostile environment beyond. Your uncle, still stationed here, studies the sky with an expression that reveals decades of weather-reading experience. The sky is indeed clear, as the changed wind suggested, a pale gray that will lighten to white as the sun rises. Clear skies mean bitter cold, but they also mean visibility, which is its own form of safety. Back before dark, your uncle says, not a question but a statement of expectation. You nod. This too is fundamental. Whatever you set out to do, you must complete it with enough time to return before darkness falls. Being caught outside at night in winter is a death sentence, plain and simple. The temperature drops even further when the sun sets, and navigation becomes nearly impossible, and the risks multiply beyond calculation. You step through the entrance and immediately feel the cold hit you like a physical force. It is shocking despite all your preparation, a visceral reminder that you are not meant to be out here, that your species evolved in warmth, and that your presence in this frozen world is an act of audacious defiance against nature's clear intentions. The wind, light but persistent, finds every tiny gap in your layers, every imperfect seam, and exploits these weaknesses ruthlessly. The landscape before you is transformed from what you remember. Snow has fallen during the night, not a heavy accumulation, but enough to soften the hard edges of the earlier snow, to cover the paths that had begun to form. Everything is white and gray, the world reduced to its most minimal palette. The trees stand bare, their branches dark against the pale sky, their forms skeletal and stark. Nothing moves in this landscape except the wind pushing small crystals of snow across the surface, creating patterns that shift and dissolve and reform in endless variation. You begin walking, your cousin beside you, your feet breaking through the crust of snow with each step. The sound is sharp in the cold air, a rhythmic crunching that becomes the dominant noise of your journey. You walk with purpose but not with haste, maintaining a pace that you know you can sustain for the hours ahead. Speed is meaningless if it exhausts you before you reach your destination. The trap line follows the creek, which is frozen now, its surface a milky white that conceals the dark water still flowing beneath. You stay well away from the creek bed itself, knowing that the ice can be treacherous, that warm springs or faster currents can create weak spots that appear solid but will give way under weight. You follow instead the route that was established earlier in winter, marked with subtle signs that would be invisible to the untrained eye, but which you read effortlessly. A branch bent at a certain angle, stones stacked in a small cairn, a particular tree with a distinctive scar in its bark. The first trap is empty. This is not unexpected. The traps operate on probability, on the understanding that most of them will be empty most of the time. but that the cumulative effect of checking many traps regularly is a steady supply of food. You inspect the trap anyway, checking that it has not been sprung by wind or snow, resetting the trigger mechanism, replacing the bait, a small piece of fat that has been carried in a pouch against your body to keep it from freezing solid. The second trap, located in a dense thicket where rabbits are known to shelter, holds a catch. You see the small form from a distance, a dark shape against the white snow, and you feel a surge of satisfaction that is both emotional and practical. This rabbit represents calories, represents protein and fat, represents continuation. You approach carefully, checking the surroundings automatically for signs of predators that might have been attracted to the trapped animal. The rabbit is dead, frozen in the position of its final struggle. Your cousin removes it from the trap with practiced efficiency, checking the trap mechanism to ensure it was not damaged, resetting it immediately. The rabbit goes into the leather bag you carry for this purpose, its small body rigid with cold. You do not pause to process it here. That work will be done back at the cave, in warmth and safety, where nothing of the animal will be wasted. You continue along the line, checking each trap in sequence. The work develops a rhythm, a pattern of walking and observing and manipulating mechanisms that becomes almost meditative. Your mind settles into a state that is alert but not anxious, focused but not stressed. You are aware of your body, of the sensation of cold on your face, of the slight burning in your lungs from breathing cold air, despite the protection of the scarf, of the building fatigue in your legs from walking through deep snow. 2 more traps yield catches, both rabbits. This is a good return, better than average. 3 rabbits will provide significant nutrition when distributed among the group, and their fur, once processed, will be valuable for repairs and for clothing for the children who are growing. Nothing about these animals will be wasted. The meat will be consumed, the organs will be consumed, the bones will be boiled for marrow and then carved into tools or ornaments. The sinew will be saved for thread, the fur will be preserved and used. At the furthest point of the trap line, you pause to rest. This is a place you have come to know well through repeated visits, a small clearing where several large rocks provide some shelter from the wind. You and your cousin sit with your backs against one of these rocks, sharing its slight heat retention, eating a small portion of the dried meat you carried with you. The meat is so hard that you must soften it in your mouth before you can chew it, but it provides fuel for the return journey. From this vantage point, you can see a great distance across the frozen landscape. The valley stretches out before you, white and empty, bounded by hills that rise in gentle curves against the pale sky. There is a beauty to this scene, though it is a harsh beauty, unforgiving and austere. You have learned to appreciate it, to find something moving in the stark simplicity of winter, in the reduction of the world to its essential elements: earth, sky, cold, survival. You think about the people who lived here before you, the ones who left behind the paintings deep in the cave system, images of animals and hunters and mysterious symbols whose meaning has been lost. They too sat in places like this, looked out over landscapes like this, felt the cold work its way into their bones despite their best defenses. They too checked traps, gathered food, returned to caves, repeated the cycles that winter demands. You are part of a continuity that extends backward through time beyond memory, and you will extend it forward if you survive, if you reproduce, if you pass on the knowledge and skills that make survival possible. Your cousin rises, and you rise with him. The sun has reached its highest point, which is not very high at all in winter, and will soon begin its descent. You have time to return comfortably, but there is no reason to linger. The cold is constant, patient, always waiting for any opportunity, any moment of carelessness or bad luck. You begin the return journey, retracing your steps, following the same landmarks in reverse. The return is always faster than the outward journey, partly because you are following a broken path through the snow, partly because you are motivated by the promise of warmth and rest. But you maintain discipline, maintaining the same sustainable pace, watching for dangers, staying alert. This is when accidents happen, when people become complacent, when the mind begins to anticipate warmth and safety and loses focus on present reality. You are perhaps halfway back when your cousin stops suddenly, holding up one hand in a gesture that means, "Halt, look, listen." You stop instantly, all your senses heightening. Your cousin is staring off to the left, into a dense section of forest. You follow his gaze, and after a moment you see what he has seen. Tracks in the snow, large tracks, the distinctive paw prints of a cave lion. The tracks are not fresh, they have been partially filled by the light snowfall and blown snow. But they are not old either. Perhaps from the previous day, perhaps from earlier this morning. You and your cousin study them carefully, reading the story they tell. The lion was moving steadily, not hunting but traveling, passing through this territory. The stride length suggests a large animal, mature, powerful. You look at each other, and a decision is made without words. You will alter your route slightly, giving the area where these tracks lead a wide berth. There is no reason to risk an encounter. The lion is probably far away by now, but probably is not the same as certainly, and winter survival is built on the elimination of unnecessary risks. The 3 rabbits in your bag are a good catch, but they are not worth challenging a predator that could kill you both in seconds. You arc around, adding time to your journey but buying safety. Your cousin marks this location mentally, logging it with all the other data points that inform the group's understanding of their territory. Where animals move, where dangers lurk, where opportunities present themselves. This information will be shared when you return, added to the collective knowledge, considered in future planning. The cave comes into view as the sun touches the tops of the western hills. The sight of it triggers a response in your body, relaxation of muscles you did not realize were tense, a release of breath you did not know you were holding. You have been gone for hours, and while you never doubted your ability to return, there is always an element of uncertainty in winter travel. Always the knowledge that conditions can change rapidly, that accidents can occur, that the margin between success and disaster is sometimes very thin. The entrance, when you reach it, feels warm by comparison to the outside air, though it is not objectively warm at all. The fire has been built up, and smoke rises through the natural chimney formed by a fissure in the rock overhead. People look up as you enter, their eyes going immediately to the bag you carry, assessing, calculating. When you open the bag and reveal the 3 rabbits, there are nods of satisfaction, a few words of acknowledgement. This is a success, a contribution, a justification for the resources expended in your journey. You help process the rabbits, working by the fire where the light is best and the warmth makes the work less painful for your cold, stiffened fingers. The fur is removed first, carefully, with stone blades that have been sharpened and resharpened countless times. The pelts are stretched on frames made from bent wood, positioned near the fire, but not too close, where they will dry slowly. The meat is butchered, divided, distributed according to protocols that account for age, health, contribution, need. The organs are set aside for immediate consumption, as they spoil quickly and cannot be preserved. The bones are cracked to extract marrow, which is eaten immediately, a rich source of fat and calories. As darkness falls completely outside, the cave settles into its evening rhythm. The fire is built up, creating a sphere of warmth and light that pushes back the darkness. People arrange themselves in their familiar positions, tending to small tasks, repairing tools and clothing, telling stories, simply sitting in companionable silence. Children play quiet games near the fire, their movements constrained by the limited space, but their spirits not diminished. You find your place again, settling into the space that has become yours, arranging your furs with the automatic precision of long practice. Your body aches pleasantly from the day's exertion, and you feel the deep satisfaction of having contributed, of having performed your function within the group's survival strategy. You are clean and fed, warm and safe, surrounded by people who share your struggles and your small victories. Your father appears beside you, crouching down, his presence always solid and reassuring. He asks about the trap line, and you tell him about the catches, about the lion tracks, about the conditions of the snow and the ice. He listens carefully, nodding, occasionally asking a question for clarification. This is how knowledge is transmitted, how the next generation learns the countless details that mean the difference between survival and death. Every observation you made today, every decision you took, every small action you performed, all of it is data that can be analyzed, discussed, refined, and passed on. When your father leaves, you lie back on your furs, staring up at the smoke-blackened ceiling of the cave. The light from the fire flickers across the stone, creating patterns that shift and dance, never quite the same from one moment to the next. You can hear the sounds of the cave around you, voices in conversation, the crackle of burning wood, someone scraping a hide, a child laughing at something. These sounds are the sounds of human persistence, of the stubborn refusal to surrender to winter's intention to eliminate you. You think about the summer that will eventually come, though it seems impossibly distant now, almost mythical. You remember warmth, remember the feeling of sun on your skin, remember the abundance of the growing season when food was plentiful and life was if not easy, at least less relentlessly difficult. But that summer is months away, and between now and then lies an expanse of time that must be navigated day by day, decision by decision, trap by trap, fire by fire. You close your eyes, feeling sleep begin to approach, that gradual softening of consciousness that signals the body's need for rest and repair. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new tasks, new risks. There will be more traps to check, more firewood to gather, more food to hunt or scavenge or process. There will be the constant management of warmth, the endless negotiation with cold. There will be cooperation and conflict, small joys and small sorrows, the full texture of human life compressed into the confines of a cave and the demands of survival. But tonight, in this moment, you are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. Tonight, you are alive, and the people you care about are alive, and the fire burns, and the cold is held at bay. Tonight, winter has not won. Tomorrow, you will wake and do it all again, and the day after that, and the day after that, until finally, eventually, impossibly, the season turns and the ice begins to melt and the first green shoots push up through the frozen earth. And you will have survived another winter, will have earned the right to see another spring. You stand at the mouth of the cave as dawn breaks over a landscape transformed by night, the world below dressed in a fresh mantle of snow that softens every edge and muffles every sound. And you feel the cold air move through your chest with each breath, sharp and clean, carrying with it the scent of ice and stone and something older than memory. The wind has gentled since darkness fell, no longer the howling force that rattled the hide coverings and sent spirals of snow dancing through the outer chambers, but a steady presence that reminds you winter has not finished speaking, that the season still holds reserves of cold you have not yet witnessed, depths you cannot yet imagine. Behind you, deeper in the cave where the firelight still flickers against ancient walls, you hear the soft sounds of your people beginning to stir, the rustle of fur blankets being pushed aside, the quiet murmur of voices greeting the new day, and you know that today will bring challenges that will test everything you have learned, everything you have prepared, everything you have become in your long negotiation with this unforgiving season. The snow reaches halfway up your shin when you step beyond the sheltered overhang, and you feel its resistance against your wrapped feet, the weight of it, the way it wants to hold you in place, as if the winter itself is reluctant to let you pass through its territory. You have wrapped your feet in layers today, first the rabbit fur turned inward against your skin, then the tougher outer hide from the auroch, and finally the binding of plant fiber that you softened for days in water, before working it into something that could withstand both moisture and cold. Each layer serves its purpose, each one a small victory against the conditions that want to draw the warmth from your body, and you think about how much knowledge went into something as simple as covering your feet, how many generations watched toes blacken and fall away before someone discovered that fur against skin holds warmth better than hide alone, that moisture is as dangerous as cold, that movement keeps blood flowing to the extremities even when the body wants to draw everything inward. To protect the core, you move away from the cave mouth with purpose now, following a route you scouted weeks ago when the snow was lighter and the landmarks more visible, heading toward the line of evergreens that marks the eastern boundary of your winter territory. The sun climbs slowly behind clouds that sit heavy and gray across the sky, and you know from the color of them, from the weight of the air pressing down, that more snow will come before nightfall, perhaps a great deal of it, and this knowledge speeds your steps because you need to reach the deadfall tree you spotted during the last clear day. The massive pine that came down under the weight of ice and now offers wood that will burn slow and hot through the long nights that still stretch before you. The cold has a quality this morning that feels different from yesterday's cold, sharper somehow, more insistent, and you recognize this as a sign that the season is deepening rather than breaking, that the worst of winter may still lie ahead despite the weeks you have already endured. You have learned to read these subtle shifts in temperature and air pressure the way you once learned to read animal tracks, understanding that survival depends on noticing things before they become obvious, on feeling the change in the wind before the storm arrives, on recognizing the particular silence that precedes heavy snowfall. Your grandfather taught you this, walking beside you through winters that seemed endless when you were young, pointing out signs you would have missed, sharing knowledge that his grandfather had shared with him, an unbroken chain of survival stretching back through generations you cannot count, each link forged in cold and darkness and the absolute necessity of paying attention. The landscape you move through bears little resemblance to the autumn world you knew just months ago. Trees that stood distinct and individual now blur together under their burden of snow, and the stream that cut a clear path through the valley has disappeared beneath ice and drifted powder, visible only as a slight depression running between the banks. You navigate by the shape of the land itself, by the rise and fall of the ground beneath your feet, by the way certain rock formations catch the light, by instincts you have developed through years of reading this country in all its seasonal transformations. You pass the 3 standing stones that mark the halfway point to the deadfall, their tops just visible above the accumulated snow, and you remember summer days when those stones stood as tall as your shoulder, how children played around their bases, how the sun warmed their dark surfaces until you could press your palm against them and feel the stored heat radiating back. A raven calls from somewhere to your left, its voice carrying clear and harsh across the muffled whiteness, and you pause to locate it, finding the dark shape perched in the bare branches of an ash tree, watching you with the intelligent attention that has always made you feel these birds no more than they reveal. You have noticed ravens throughout this winter, appearing at moments when you found game or discovered something useful, and you wonder if they follow your people deliberately, understanding that humans create opportunities for scavenging, or if it is simply that you both inhabit the same hard country and occasionally your paths intersect. The bird shifts its weight from foot to foot, tilts its head, then launches itself into the air with strong wing beats that send small cascades of snow falling from the branches, and you watch it fly west toward the high country, toward regions where the snow lies even deeper, and the game has retreated to valleys you cannot reach. You think about the raven's flight as you resume your journey, about how birds navigate this winter world with such apparent ease while you struggle through snow that impedes every step. You have watched geese and swans fly south at the start of cold seasons, watched them return when warmth comes again, and you wonder what knowledge guides them, what sense they possess that tells them when to leave and when to return, whether they see the world as a vast map in their minds or simply follow instincts too deep for questioning. Your people do not have the option of flight, cannot escape winter by moving with the seasons, and so you have learned instead to inhabit the cold, to make homes in its depths, to find ways of persisting through conditions that would kill you in days if you faced them unprepared and alone. The forest opens up ahead where the deadfall created a gap in the canopy, and you see the massive trunk lying across the slope exactly where you remembered it, half buried now in snow but still accessible, its wood weathered but solid, the branches spreading out like the ribs of some enormous beast. You approach carefully, testing the snow depth with each step, and when you reach the tree you brush away the accumulated powder to examine the wood beneath, pressing your fingers against it, checking for rot or excessive moisture, finding it dry enough to burn well despite the conditions. This tree will provide fuel for many days if you can transport it back to the cave in manageable pieces, and you feel a surge of satisfaction at having remembered its location, at having planned ahead during a moment of clear weather, at having thought beyond immediate need to future necessity. You remove the stone axe from your pack, feeling its familiar weight in your hand, the smooth handle worn to fit your grip from countless hours of use. The binding that holds the blade to the shaft is fresh, replaced just before the heavy snows came, and you trust it to hold through the work ahead. You begin on one of the larger branches, striking with controlled force, feeling the impact travel up your arm with each blow, watching chips of wood fly and land in the surrounding snow. The work warms you quickly despite the cold air, and you fall into the rhythm of it, the steady percussion of stone against wood, the gradual progress as the branch begins to separate from the trunk, the satisfaction of seeing tangible results from sustained effort. The sound of your work echoes slightly in the winter stillness, and you remain aware of your surroundings even as you focus on the task, listening for any sound that might indicate danger, watching the edges of your vision for movement. Wolves have been active in the region this winter, driven down from higher elevations by the deep snow, and though they rarely approach humans directly, hunger can make any creature bold, can override the usual caution that keeps the boundaries between species clear. You have seen their tracks crossing your own trails, have heard their howling carry across the valleys on clear nights, and you know they watch your people just as you watch them, each trying to understand the other's patterns and intentions. The branch comes free with a final solid strike, and you drag it clear of the trunk, examining its length and thickness, judging it suitable for carrying. You begin on another, working your way along the deadfall, selecting branches that will provide maximum fuel for the effort of transport. The work is meditative in its way, requiring attention but not complex thought, allowing your mind to wander while your hands stay busy, and you find yourself thinking about the cycle of seasons, about how this tree grew through dozens of summers, storing energy from the sun in its wood, only to fall at last under winter's weight and now provide warmth that will help your people survive the cold that killed it. You have always found it strange how death feeds life in this way, how the fallen provide for the living, how nothing is truly wasted if you know how to use it. The deer that falls to your spear becomes food and clothing and tools and glue and thread, every part serving some purpose, honored by being fully utilized. The tree that can no longer grow becomes fire and shelter and implements, its wood shaped to human needs, continuing to serve even in its ending. Even your own people, when they die, return to the earth that sustained them, their bodies becoming part of the soil from which new growth will spring when warmth returns. You do not know if there is intention in this pattern, some design by forces you cannot perceive, or if it is simply the way things are, the fundamental nature of a world where everything connects to everything else in an endless web of transformation and exchange. The sun has climbed higher now, though it remains hidden behind the gray ceiling of clouds, and you can feel the temperature dropping again as you work, the brief relative warmth of morning giving way to the deeper cold of midday. You have several branches cut and ready for transport, and you begin the work of bundling them together, using lengths of twisted plant fiber to bind them into a load you can drag across the snow. The fiber is stiff in the cold, resistant to bending, and your fingers begin to ache as you work the knots, but you persist with patience born of necessity, knowing that a secure bundle now will save you from having to retrieve dropped wood later. As you work, you become aware of a change in the quality of the silence around you, a subtle shift that makes you lift your head and scan the treeline. At first you see nothing unusual, just the familiar landscape of snow and stone and winter-stripped trees, but then movement catches your eye, a flicker of brown against white, and you see them emerging from the forest perhaps 50 paces away. A small group of deer, 3 does and a yearling, picking their way carefully through the deep snow, their breath visible in small clouds before their muzzles. They have not seen you yet, or perhaps have seen you but judged you too far away to pose immediate threat, and they move with the cautious grace that characterizes their kind, pausing frequently to test the air, their large ears rotating to catch any sound of danger. You remain absolutely still, barely breathing, watching them with an intensity that extends beyond mere observation into something closer to communion. These deer represent survival in its most direct form. Meat that would feed your people for days, hides that would provide clothing and shelter materials, sinew for binding and sewing, bones for tools and needles. But you have no spear with you today, only the axe meant for wood, and the distance is too great in any case, the snow too deep for the kind of pursuit that might bring you within striking range. So you simply watch them, studying their movement patterns, noting which direction they came from and which way they seem to be heading, storing this information against future need. The deer find something beneath the snow, some patch of dried grass or remaining browse, and they begin to feed, pawing through the powder with their sharp hooves, their movements economical and efficient. You can see how thin they have become over the course of winter, their ribs visible beneath their thick coats, the sharp angles of their hip bones pronounced. They are suffering under these conditions just as you are, just as every living thing in this landscape is suffering, all caught together in winter's grip, all struggling to persist until the season breaks and abundance returns. The yearling especially looks gaunt, and you wonder if it will survive to see spring, or if it will fall to predators or starvation before warmth comes again, becoming food for wolves or ravens or the countless smaller creatures that depend on death for their survival. You watch the deer until they move on, disappearing back into the forest on a trail only they can detect, and then you return to your work with renewed focus, understanding that every moment spent in this cold draws energy from your body that you will need to replace with food from finite stores. You finish securing the bundle of branches, testing the knots one final time, then arrange the carrying strap across your chest, leaning forward to take the weight. The bundle resists at first, frozen to the ground beneath it, but comes free with a solid pull, and you begin the journey back toward the cave, the wood dragging behind you, leaving a clear furrow in the snow. The return trip is harder than the outward journey, the weight of the wood adding to the difficulty of moving through deep snow, and you settle into a steady pace that you know you can maintain, not fast but unrelenting, each step a small victory against the resistance. Your breath comes harder now, your heart working to fuel your muscles, and you feel sweat beginning to form beneath your layers despite the cold. Moisture that you know you will need to manage carefully, because wet clothing loses its insulating properties and damp skin loses heat rapidly. You have seen people die from ignoring this simple fact, pushing too hard in cold weather, soaking their garments with sweat, then cooling rapidly when they stopped moving and discovering too late that they had created the conditions for their own deaths. You pause at intervals to adjust the carrying strap, to brush snow from your wrappings, to look back and ensure the bundle remains secure. During one of these stops, you notice tracks crossing your path, fresh prints that were not there when you passed this way earlier. Wolf tracks, large ones, a single animal moving with purpose along the base of the ridge. You study the prints carefully, noting their direction, their spacing, the way they sink into the snow, reading the story they tell. This wolf passed within the last hour, moving quickly but not running, following some scent or intention you cannot identify. You look around carefully, scanning the treeline and the open slopes, but see no sign of the animal itself. And after a moment you continue onward, more alert now, aware that you are not alone in this winter landscape. The tracks remind you of a wolf you saw 2 winters ago, a large gray male that you encountered one evening near dusk. Both of you surprised by the meeting, both of you stopping to regard each other across a distance of perhaps 20 paces. You remember the intelligence in its eyes, the way it assessed you without obvious fear, but without aggression either, simply noting your presence as one more factor in its constant calculation of risk and opportunity. You stood together in that mutual evaluation for what felt like a long time, but was probably only moments, and then the wolf turned and trotted away, vanishing into the twilight, and you continued on your way, both of you accepting that this was not the time or place for conflict. You have thought about that encounter many times since, wondering what the wolf saw when it looked at you, whether it recognized you as a fellow predator, whether it understood that you two were part of the hunt, part of the endless cycle of pursuit and evasion that defines life in the wild. The smoke from your cave becomes visible when you are still some distance away, a thin line rising into the gray sky, and the sight of it fills you with something like relief, a recognition of home and safety and the presence of your people. You know that smoke is dangerous, that it signals your location to anything that can see it, but you also know that fire is necessary for survival, that the choice is not between smoke and no smoke, but between survival with risk and death from cold. Everything in winter comes down to such calculations, weighing one danger against another, choosing the lesser threat, understanding that safety is never absolute but always relative, always a matter of managing risk rather than eliminating it. As you approach the cave entrance, you see others of your group outside working at various tasks despite the cold. Your cousin is stretching a rabbit hide on a frame, scraping away the last bits of tissue and fat, his movements practiced and efficient. 2 of the younger hunters are practicing with their spears, throwing at a target they have fashioned from bundled grass, their breath steaming with each exhalation. An elder sits near the entrance, working patiently at a piece of bone, shaping it with slow, careful scrapes of a stone blade, creating what will eventually become a needle or an awl or some other small tool essential to survival. Everyone has work to do, even in the depths of winter, especially in the depths of winter, because idle hands grow cold and idle minds grow dark, and the work itself becomes a kind of salvation, a way of maintaining purpose when the season seems endless. You drag your bundle of wood to the storage area near the cave mouth, a spot protected from direct snowfall, but open to air circulation to prevent rot, and begin adding your harvest to the growing pile there. Others acknowledge your return with nods and quiet words, not effusive in their greeting but genuine, recognizing your contribution to the collective store. Your younger sister helps you untie the bundle, her fingers nimble despite the cold, and together you stack the branches carefully, ensuring good airflow between them, setting them where they will be easy to access when needed. She tells you that your mother has been working on a new preparation, something involving dried berries and rendered fat, experimenting with proportions to create something that will provide concentrated energy for hunters in the field. And you feel pride at this innovation, at your mother's constant thinking about how to improve your chances, how to solve problems before they become critical. Inside the cave, the temperature is notably warmer than the outside air, the fire and the presence of many bodies creating a microclimate that makes survival possible. The smoke from the fire rises naturally toward cracks and fissures in the cave roof, drawn by air currents that keep the interior breathable, and you have often marveled at how your ancestors knew to choose this particular cave, how they recognized the features that made it suitable for long-term habitation. The main chamber extends back about 30 paces from the entrance, with several smaller side chambers that serve as storage areas and sleeping spaces, the whole complex carved over eons by water that no longer flows here, shaped by forces that worked on timescales you cannot comprehend. The fire pit sits in the center of the main chamber, ringed by stones that have been selected and placed with care, flat rocks that absorb heat during the day and radiate it back through the night, maintaining a base level of warmth even when the fire burns low. The flames dance and flicker, fed by the careful addition of wood that has been dried near the fire itself, each piece placed with consideration for how it will burn, how much heat and smoke it will produce, how long it will last. Fire management is a skill that takes years to master, an art of understanding wood types and air flow and heat distribution, and the person tending the fire at any given time, currently one of the senior women, a grandmother with decades of experience, carries responsibility for everyone's survival. You move to the fire to warm yourself after the cold journey, holding your hands near the flames until feeling returns to your fingers, flexing them to encourage circulation, being careful not to warm them too quickly because you know that rapid temperature changes can damage tissue. Others gather near the fire as well, drawn by its warmth and light, and there is a quiet companionability in this gathering, a sense of shared purpose that requires no words. You have spent countless hours in groups like this, winter evenings when darkness falls early and there is nothing to do but stay warm and wait for sleep, and you have come to treasure these times despite their monotony, understanding that boredom is a luxury, a sign that you are safe enough and warm enough and fed enough to have the leisure to be bored. Your father sits nearby, working on a spear shaft, using a stone blade to shave away small curls of wood, gradually bringing the shaft to perfect straightness and balance. He works with absolute concentration, occasionally holding the shaft up to sight along its length, making minute adjustments, his hands moving with the confidence of someone who has made hundreds of such tools over a lifetime. You watch him work for a while, appreciating the skill in his hands, remembering all the times he taught you similar tasks, his patience with your early clumsy attempts, his insistence that doing things correctly was worth the additional time and effort, because your life might one day depend on the quality of your work. As evening approaches, the light filtering in through the cave entrance begins to fade, transitioning from gray to deep blue, and you feel the temperature drop further, the cold intensifying as the sun, though invisible behind clouds all day, slips below the horizon. This is the dangerous time, the hours when cold becomes lethal, when anyone caught outside without shelter faces death with certainty. You think of the deer you saw earlier and wonder where they spend their nights, whether they huddle together in some sheltered spot or simply stand enduring the cold in the open, relying on their thick coats and their ability to lower their metabolic rate to survive until dawn. You think of the wolf whose tracks you crossed and wonder about its den, whether it hunts through the night or rests, whether it feels cold the way you do or experiences the winter differently through its different physiology. The evening meal is prepared communally, everyone contributing what they can to the pot that hangs over the fire. Dried meat, roots from storage, herbs that add flavor and nutrition, water melted from snow. The pot itself is a marvel of technology, carved from soapstone over the course of many days, heavy enough to be permanent fixture rather than portable equipment, its surface blackened by countless fires, its shape refined through generations of use to maximize heating efficiency and minimize spillage. The food cooks slowly, filling the cave with savory smells that make your stomach tighten in anticipation. And you realize you have eaten very little today, your body running on reserves of energy that will need to be replenished. While the meal cooks, one of the elders begins to tell a story, her voice rising and falling in practiced cadences, describing events from long ago, a winter when she was young and the snow came even deeper than this year, covering the cave entrance entirely, forcing the people to tunnel out like animals burrowing through earth. You have heard this story before many times, but you listen again with attention because each telling reveals new details or emphasizes different aspects, and because the stories themselves are a form of technology as important as fire or tools, carrying knowledge across generations, preserving solutions to problems that recur with each winter, each difficult season, each moment of crisis. The story tells of hunger and cold and near despair, but also of innovation and cooperation and eventual survival, and its message is clear. Others have faced conditions as difficult as these and persevered. Therefore you too can persevere if you remember what they learned and follow what they taught. The meal, when it is finally ready, is distributed carefully, each person receiving a portion appropriate to their needs and their day's exertions. You accept your bowl with quiet thanks, feeling the warmth of it against your palms, and you eat slowly, savoring each bite, aware that every mouthful represents energy that will sustain you through the cold night and into tomorrow's challenges. The meat is tender from long cooking, falling apart easily, and the roots have absorbed the flavors of the broth. And though the meal is simple by any standard, in this moment and this place it seems like abundance, like wealth beyond counting. After eating, you feel drowsiness settling over you, your body demanding rest after the day's exertions. And you move to your sleeping area in one of the side chambers, where furs and hides have been layered to create insulation from the stone floor and walls. Others are settling into their own sleeping spaces, the cave gradually quieting as people prepare for night. Children already asleep in nests of fur, their parents arranging coverings and checking that everyone is warm enough. The fire in the main chamber will be tended through the night by people taking turns, ensuring it never dies completely, maintaining the barrier of warmth that stands between your people and the lethal cold outside. You lie in your sleeping space, wrapped in furs that smell of smoke and animal and the distinctive scent of well-worn leather. And you think about the day that has passed, about the wood you gathered and the tracks you saw, and the deer moving ghost-like through the winter forest. You think about tomorrow and the work that will need to be done, about checking the snare lines and gathering more wood, and repairing a section of the entrance barrier that has begun to come loose. You think about spring, still distant but approaching with each day that passes, moving toward you with the inexorable patience of the seasons, carrying with it the promise of warmth and green growth and the loosening of winter's grip. But spring is not here yet, and you know better than to let thoughts of future ease distract you from present necessity. Winter still holds you, still tests you, still demands every bit of knowledge and skill and determination you possess. Outside the cave, the temperature continues to fall, and new snow begins to fall from the laden clouds, adding to the already substantial accumulation, building the drifts deeper, making the world even more difficult to navigate. Somewhere out in that darkness, wolves are hunting, deer are huddling, trees are creaking under their burden of ice. The night is vast and cold and indifferent to survival, and yet here in this cave, in this small sphere of warmth and light and human presence, life persists. You close your eyes and let yourself drift towards sleep, your breathing slowing, your muscles relaxing, your mind quieting at last. You have survived another day. Tomorrow you will wake and face whatever challenges the season presents. You will work and endure and persist because that is what your people have always done, what they will continue to do as long as they remember what winter has taught them, as long as they maintain the knowledge and skills and social bonds that make survival possible. Sleep comes at last, pulling you down into depths where cold cannot reach, and the cave around you breathes quietly in the darkness, alive with the subtle sounds of survival, the soft chorus of persistence in the face of winter's long, patient siege. You wake before the others, as you often do now, your body attuned to the subtle shifts in light that filter through the cave's narrow opening. The fire has burned down to a bed of coals, their orange glow pulsing gently in the darkness, and you rise quietly, careful not to disturb the sleepers arranged around the hearth like petals around a flower's heart. Your joints are stiff from the cold, your breath visible in the air, and you move slowly, giving your body time to remember how to bend and stretch after the long night's stillness. The storm that began yesterday has passed, leaving behind a silence so profound it feels almost sacred. You add fuel to the coals, watching as the dry grass catches first, then the smaller twigs, and finally the larger branches that will sustain warmth through the morning. The flames grow, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls, illuminating the ochre handprints your people have left there over countless seasons. Marks of presence that say we were here, we endured, we continue. You think about the woman who was lost, whose absence has become a permanent fixture in the cave's atmosphere, a weight that presses on all of you differently. Some days you barely notice it, absorbed in the immediate demands of survival. Other days, like this morning, it sits heavy on your chest, a stone you cannot swallow or spit out. You have learned that grief does not follow a straight path, that it circles and returns, that it changes shape but never quite disappears. The old woman stirs, her eyes opening to find you already tending the fire. She nods, a gesture of acknowledgement that requires no words, and slowly sits up, her movements careful and deliberate. She has been quieter since the loss, her stories less frequent, but you have noticed a new quality in her presence, something deeper and more settled, as though she has made peace with truths you are only beginning to understand. The child wakes next, as children do, with sudden completeness, one moment asleep and the next fully present. He comes to you immediately, pressing against your side, seeking warmth and reassurance, and you wrap your arm around him, feeling the small solidity of his body, the quick rhythm of his breathing. He has grown during this long winter, his limbs lengthening, his face losing some of its baby roundness, and you realize with a start that he is becoming someone new, that all of you are constantly becoming, shaped by the seasons and the struggles and the small victories that accumulate like snowfall. The others wake gradually, stretching and coughing and moving toward the fire, and the cave fills with the familiar sounds of morning. The shuffle of feet on stone, the quiet exchange of greetings, the small domestic noises that mean safety and continuity. You notice how the group has settled into new rhythms since the woman's death, how responsibilities have shifted and reformed, how each person has found ways to carry what she once carried, distributing her absence among all of you so that no single person bears it alone. The young hunter brings out the preserved meat from yesterday's kill, and you all eat slowly, chewing thoroughly, making the food last, your bodies having learned to extract every possible bit of nutrition from what you consume. The meat is tough and cold, but it is sustenance, and you are grateful for it, grateful for the hunter's skill, grateful for the animal that gave its life, grateful for the simple fact of having something to eat when so many mornings have begun with emptiness. After the meal, you venture to the cave's entrance to assess the day. The world outside is transformed, covered in fresh snow that lies pristine and undisturbed, reflecting the pale morning light with an intensity that makes you squint. The sky is clear, a blue so deep it seems almost unreal after the days of gray storm clouds, and the air is cold but still, the wind having exhausted itself in yesterday's fury. The hunter joins you, standing close enough that you can feel his warmth, and together you scan the landscape, reading it for signs and possibilities. The snow is deep, too deep for easy travel, but not so deep that movement is impossible. You can see the dark line of the forest in the distance, the trees standing like silent witnesses and closer, the shapes of rocks and bushes transformed by their white covering into strange sculptures, familiar landmarks made momentarily foreign. We should check the snares, the hunter says quietly, his breath forming clouds in the cold air, and you nod, knowing he is right, knowing that even after yesterday's success, you cannot afford to become complacent, that survival requires constant attention, constant effort, constant vigilance. You prepare carefully, wrapping your feet in extra layers of hide, securing your furs tightly around your body, making sure the bone knife is accessible at your waist. The young woman joins you, having recovered her strength in recent days, her movements once again sure and purposeful, and the three of you set out into the transformed world, leaving the others to tend the fire and work on the tasks that keep the cave habitable. The snow is knee-deep in places, and walking is difficult, each step requiring conscious effort, your legs punching through the soft surface to the harder ground beneath. But the exercise warms you quickly, your blood moving faster, your breath coming deeper, and you find a rhythm, a way of moving that conserves energy while still making progress. The world is extraordinarily quiet, the snow absorbing sound, creating a hush that feels almost reverent. You hear your own breathing, the crunch of snow beneath your feet, the occasional call of a bird, but little else. It is as though the storm has swept everything away, leaving behind only essentials, only what truly matters. You reach the first snare and find it empty, the mechanism undisturbed, and you reset it carefully, adjusting the placement slightly, using your accumulated knowledge of animal behavior to make tiny improvements. The second snare is also empty, and the third, and you feel the familiar mixture of disappointment and acceptance that comes with hunting, the understanding that success is never guaranteed, that much of this life is about managing failure, about continuing despite the absence of reward. But the fourth snare holds a surprise, a rabbit frozen and stiff, caught sometime during the storm. It is not large, but it is something, another small gift from the land, and you feel a surge of gratitude as you carefully remove it, resetting the snare with cold-numbed fingers. The young woman smiles, the first genuine smile you have seen from her in days, and the hunter nods approvingly, and these small exchanges of acknowledgement feel precious in the vast white silence. You check the remaining snares and find 2 more rabbits, a harvest better than you dared hope for, and by the time you turn back toward the cave, the sun has risen higher, its light brilliant on the snow, and despite the cold, despite the difficulty, you feel something approaching joy, a lightness in your chest that has been absent for too long. The return journey is easier, your path already broken through the snow, and you arrive at the cave to find the old woman working with plant fibers, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency despite the cold, creating cordage that will be used for 100 different purposes. The child is helping her, his small hands clumsy but earnest, and she is teaching him with patience, showing him again and again how to twist and bind, how to create strength from fragile individual strands. You present the rabbits, and there is a moment of quiet celebration, nods and smiles, and a sense of collective relief. The group sets to work processing the catch, a task everyone participates in, hands moving with coordinated efficiency born of long practice. Nothing is wasted. The meat will be eaten, the fur will be used for clothing or bedding, the bones will become tools or toggles, the sinew will be dried and used for binding and sewing. As you work, carefully skinning the first rabbit, you think about how much knowledge is embedded in these simple actions, how many generations of trial and error have led to this moment, how each small technique has been refined and passed down, a river of information flowing through time. Your hands know what to do almost without thought, moving with certainty, and you realize that this is what it means to be truly skilled, to have practiced something so many times that it becomes part of your body's memory, something you carry not in your mind but in your muscles and nerves. The afternoon passes in this quiet industry, each person absorbed in their tasks, the cave filled with the small sounds of work, the scraping of stone on hide, the whisper of fibers being twisted, the soft conversation between the old woman and the child as she continues his lesson. The fire burns steadily, its warmth a constant presence, and you are aware of how fortunate you are to have fuel, to have food, to have shelter, to have each other. As evening approaches, you step outside again, drawn by the quality of light, the way the setting sun paints the snow in shades of pink and gold and lavender, colors so beautiful they make your chest ache. The hunter is there already, standing motionless, watching, and you join him in silence, both of you bearing witness to this daily miracle, this transformation of the ordinary world into something transcendent. I was thinking about her, the hunter says quietly, and you know immediately whom he means, and you nod, waiting for him to continue. I was thinking about how she used to stand here, watching the sunset, how she would sometimes sing, very softly, songs her mother taught her. You remember this, remember the sound of her voice, thin and clear, carrying melodies you did not know but that felt ancient, felt important, felt like they contained knowledge beyond words. You have not heard those songs since she died, and you realize with a pang that they may be lost now, that music she carried forward from earlier generations may end with her, a break in the chain of transmission. I wish I had learned them, the hunter says, and there is regret in his voice, but also acceptance, and you understand that he is not asking for comfort or reassurance, that he is simply stating a truth, naming a loss. I wish I had paid more attention. You stand together as the light fades, as the brilliant colors dim to blues and purples and finally to the deep indigo of twilight, and you think about all the things you wish you had learned, all the questions you wish you had asked, all the moments you let pass without fully recognizing their importance. But you also think about what you have managed to preserve, what you have managed to carry forward, and you feel the weight of responsibility, the understanding that you are now the ones who must remember, who must teach, who must ensure that some part of what was known continues into the future. Inside the cave, the meal is ready, rabbit stew with the last of the dried roots, and you eat together, sitting close around the fire, the flames illuminating your faces from below, casting shadows that make everyone look older, more weathered, more marked by experience. The food is hot and nourishing, and you eat slowly, savoring each bite, making the meal last as long as possible, stretching out this time of warmth and fullness and companionship. After eating, the old woman begins a story, her voice low and steady, and you settle in to listen, the child curled against your side, his breathing gradually slowing as sleep begins to claim him. The story is one you have heard before, about the first fire, about how humans learned to capture and tend flame, but it feels different tonight, weighted with new meaning, as though the familiar words are showing you something you never quite saw before. She speaks of the cold before fire, of darkness and hunger and fear, of people huddled together in caves much like this one, struggling to survive, and you think about how little has changed, how you are still fighting the same battles, still dependent on the same fragile protections. But she also speaks of the moment of discovery, of the first spark caught and nurtured, of the way fire changed everything, made new kinds of life possible, opened doors that had been sealed shut. Fire was the first gift, she says, her eyes reflecting the flames. And with it came all the others: cooked food, warm shelters, protection from the night. But fire is also a responsibility. It must be fed and watched and tended. It can destroy as easily as it can sustain. To keep fire is to accept a sacred duty, to commit yourself to vigilance, to promise that you will not let the light go out. You hear these words differently than you would have before the woman's death, before the storm, before the long accumulated weight of this winter's challenges. You hear them as more than a story, more than a lesson about fire. You hear them as a description of life itself, of the constant effort required to maintain any kind of light in the darkness, of the vigilance needed to preserve warmth in the cold, of the commitment necessary to keep anything precious alive. The child has fallen asleep, his weight heavy and trusting against you, and you adjust carefully to make him more comfortable without waking him. The others are drowsy too, eyes half closed, faces relaxed, the day's exertions catching up with them. But the old woman continues speaking, her voice softer now, almost a murmur, and you realize she is not really telling a story anymore, but rather thinking aloud, sharing thoughts that have been forming in her mind during these long winter nights. I have seen many winters, she says. More than most are given, and each one teaches something different. Some winters teach patience, others teach resourcefulness, others teach the hard lesson of letting go. This winter has been teaching me about continuity, about what remains when everything else is stripped away. She pauses, poking at the fire with a long stick, sending up a shower of sparks that rise and fade like brief orange stars. The woman who died was my daughter's daughter, she continues, and this is something you had not known, a connection that explains the particular quality of her grief. I taught her grandmother, and her grandmother taught her mother, and her mother taught her. And she should have had time to teach her own children, to pass on what she knew, but that time was taken from her. The cave is very quiet now, everyone listening despite their sleepiness, sensing the importance of what is being said. The old woman looks around at all of you, her gaze settling on each face in turn, and when her eyes meet yours, you see something fierce and determined there, a refusal to surrender. But knowledge is not kept in one person alone, she says. It is shared among all of us, woven into the fabric of the group. What she knew, others know. What she could do, others can learn to do. The songs may be lost, and that is a sorrow I will carry to my grave. But the skill in her hands, the wisdom in her words, the kindness in her heart, these things live on in all of us who knew her, who learned from her, who were shaped by her presence. She returns her gaze to the fire, and when she speaks again, her voice is even softer, barely audible over the crackling flames. This is how we survive the coldest winters. Not just by keeping the fire burning, not just by storing food and building shelters, but by holding each other's knowledge, by carrying each other's skills, by remembering and honoring and passing forward everything we have learned. We survive by being more than individuals. We survive by being a people. The words settle over the group like a blanket, and you feel something shift inside you, a realignment of understanding, a recognition of truth. You have known in a general way that you depend on each other, that survival requires cooperation, but you have not fully grasped until this moment the deeper meaning of that interdependence, the way you are all part of a single organism that extends backward in time to your ancestors and forward in time to descendants you will never meet. You are not just surviving for yourselves. You are surviving to carry forward what has been entrusted to you, to preserve knowledge and skill and wisdom, so that future people not yet born, will have what they need to face their own winters. Every action you take, every choice you make, every bit of knowledge you acquire and practice and eventually teach, is part of this larger project, this ongoing commitment to continuity. The child stirs in his sleep, murmuring something you cannot make out, and you smooth his hair gently, feeling the small vulnerability of his skull beneath your palm. He will grow up if he survives, and he will learn everything you can teach him, and he will add his own discoveries to that knowledge, and he will pass it all forward to his own children or to other young people who need guidance. And in that way, the chain will continue, link after link, generation after generation, each one holding what came before and reaching toward what comes next. The young woman has begun to cry, quiet tears sliding down her cheeks, and the hunter moves closer to her, not speaking, just offering his presence. You understand that the old woman's words have touched something deep in all of you, have given name and meaning to feelings that have been formless and chaotic. The grief you have been carrying is not just personal, it is communal. It is part of the grief that all people feel when the chain of transmission is broken, when knowledge is lost, when someone dies before their time to teach is complete. But the old woman's words have also offered something else. A path forward, a way to transform grief into commitment, to honor loss by strengthening what remains. You cannot bring back the woman who died, cannot recover the songs she carried, cannot undo the break in the chain. But you can dedicate yourself to preserving and passing forward everything else, to making sure that other links hold strong, to weaving a fabric of knowledge and skill so tightly interconnected that no single loss can destroy it entirely. The fire burns lower, and people begin to settle into their sleeping places, arranging furs and grass padding, finding the spots they have claimed as their own through long occupancy. You carry the child to his place and tuck him in carefully, making sure he is well covered. And then you return to your own spot, lying down but not yet closing your eyes, your mind too active for immediate sleep. You think about the coming days, about the slow accumulation of small tasks and small victories that will carry you towards spring. You think about the knowledge you possess and the knowledge you still need to acquire, about the skills you must practice and refine, about the lessons you need to learn before it is your turn to teach. You think about the people around you, about how each one carries pieces of the whole, about how you must attend to their needs and their knowledge with care and respect. The old woman is right. This is how you survive the coldest winters. Not through individual heroism or isolated cleverness, but through collective wisdom, through shared responsibility, through the patient accumulation and transmission of everything your people have learned about how to live in this harsh and beautiful world. You are part of something much larger than yourself, something that extends through time, something worth preserving and protecting even at great cost. Outside, the night is cold and clear, stars bright in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, you hear the howl of a wolf, a sound that is neither threat nor comfort, but simply a statement of presence, another life persisting in the winter's grip. The sound fades and silence returns, and you lie in the warm cave surrounded by your sleeping companions, feeling the rise and fall of your own breathing, the steady beat of your heart, the simple miraculous fact of being alive. You think about the woman who died, and instead of the sharp pain that has characterized your grief until now, you feel something gentler, something approaching peace. She lived, she contributed, she was part of the chain, and though her time was shorter than it should have been, she mattered. She is remembered. What she knew has not entirely vanished. It lives on in fragments and echoes, in the skills of those she taught, in the memories of those who loved her, in the very fact that you are here, thinking of her, honoring her, carrying her forward in your heart. This is what it means to be human, you think, not to be immortal, not to live forever, but to be part of a continuity that transcends individual lives, to contribute what you can and then trust that others will carry it forward, adding their own contributions, creating something that grows and adapts and endures across generations. You are mortal, fragile, temporary. But the knowledge you carry, the skills you practice, the love you give, these things can outlast you, can become part of the permanent inheritance of your people. The fire dims to coals, glowing softly in the darkness, and you feel yourself beginning to drift towards sleep, your body finally relaxing after the day's exertions. Your last conscious thought is of gratitude, for the shelter of the cave, for the warmth of the fire, for the presence of your companions, for the food in your belly, for the knowledge in your mind and hands, for the chain of lives that led to yours and the chain of lives that will follow after. You are one link, one moment, one small part of an ongoing story, but you are here, and you are committed to doing everything you can to make sure the story continues, to make sure the fire does not go out, to make sure that your people survive not just this winter, but all the winters to come. Sleep takes you gently, and you dream of spring, of green growing things, of warmth and light and the promise of renewal. And somewhere deep in your sleeping mind, you know that winter will end, that survival is possible, that you and your people will endure because that is what you have always done, because endurance is woven into your very bones, because you carry forward the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who also faced the cold and the darkness and the hunger and found ways to persist, to continue to survive. The night passes slowly, the cold deepening, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, and in the cave, the small group of humans sleeps on, breathing in rhythm, sharing warmth, holding the knowledge that will carry them through, links in a chain that stretches back to the beginning and forward toward a future they will never see but have committed themselves to making possible. The morning arrives without ceremony, the way all mornings have arrived for longer than any story can hold. You wake before the sun reveals itself, though calling it waking feels imprecise. Your sleep during these winter months has never been the deep plunge into darkness that summer once allowed, but rather a series of shallow pools you drift through, surfacing every few hours to tend the fire, to listen for sounds that shouldn't be there, to ensure the entrance remains sealed against the wind that never truly stops its patient pressing against stone and hide and everything you've built between. Yourself and the cold that always wants, to come inside. The fire has diminished to a bed of coals that glow like the eyes of some small animal caught in shadows, and you move toward it with the careful economy of motion that has become so ingrained you no longer think about it, each gesture measured to conserve the heat your body generates, the warmth that is now more precious than flint, than ochre, than the sharpest blade. You add wood to the coals, small pieces first, the way your father showed you and his mother showed him, building the structure that will allow air to move through it, that will coax flame from ember without smothering what remains. The wood catches slowly, reluctantly, as if it too has grown weary of this season, and you crouch there watching the flames find their shape again, feeling the heat begin to reach your face and hands while your back remains in the cave's deeper cold. That division of self that has become so familiar you've almost forgotten what it feels like to be warm in all directions at once. Around you, the others still rest in their sleeping places, forms wrapped in layers of hide and fur, breathing in the slow rhythms that speak of bodies conserving themselves, burning as little as they can while remaining alive. You can identify each person by the sound of their breath, by the particular way they shift in sleep. There is the child who still whimpers sometimes, dreaming of warmer days and games played in sunlight. There is the elder whose breathing rattles like wind through dry grass. There is your partner whose presence beside you each night has become the one constant you could not survive without, though you've never found words adequate to say this. Have instead learned to communicate it through the sharing of food, through the lending of warmth, through the thousand small acts that comprise a life lived this close to the edge of what the body can endure. The cave has changed over these long months, has become something that feels less like shelter and more like a third skin you wear, its contours as known to you as your own hands. The walls bear the marks of your residence, the hooks of bone driven into cracks where tools hang and bags of preserved food swing slightly in currents of air you cannot see, the shallow depressions worn smooth where people sit in their preferred places, the darkened areas near the ceiling where smoke has painted its slow signature across stone that existed long before your kind learned to make fire and will exist long after. Though you try not to think about that second part, about the after, because survival requires a focus on the immediate that leaves little room for contemplating your own impermanence. Near the entrance, ice has formed where condensation meets cold air, creating formations that catch the firelight and throw it back in fractured colors. Beauty that serves no purpose you can name, but which you find yourself looking at sometimes, grateful for reasons that feel important even if you cannot articulate them. You check the entrance without approaching too close, the hide coverings thick with frost on their outer surfaces, barely moving in the wind that you can hear, but which these barriers diminish to a whisper, a reminder rather than a threat. Beyond them, the world continues in its frozen state, the landscape you moved through yesterday still locked in that terrible beauty that never stops taking your breath, that never stops demanding everything you have just to pass through it and return alive. But for now, for these hours before necessity pulls you back out into it, you remain in this space that human effort has claimed from the indifferent earth, this pocket of survivable air that exists only because of constant vigilance, constant work, constant attention to the details that mean the difference between morning and forever. The water bladders near the fire have remained liquid through the night, though the ones farther back have frozen solid, will require thawing before they can serve their purpose. You drink slowly, letting the water warm in your mouth before swallowing, a habit born from the sharp pain that comes from consuming anything too cold, the way it seems to freeze you from the inside, spreading an ache through your chest that takes long minutes to subside. The water tastes of smoke and leather and the animal it was carried in, and you remember when such flavors would have seemed unpleasant, would have made you wish for the clear taste of water fresh from a stream. But those distinctions have faded into irrelevance, replaced by the simple binary of liquid and frozen, consumable and not. Your hands find work without conscious direction, moving to the tasks that structure every morning of this endless season. You check the meat that hangs in the coldest section of the cave, running your fingers over its surface to ensure no moisture has collected. No signs of the rot that can appear even in these temperatures if conditions align against you. The meat is good, hard as wood, and will require long cooking to become edible. but it represents survival measured in days and weeks. Insurance against the times when going outside to hunt would mean not returning. When the wind carries such cold that exposed skin freezes in the time it takes to draw 3 breaths. You count the pieces without quite counting them, the way you do every morning, taking inventory of your buffer against starvation, calculating how much longer this supply might last if stretched carefully, if supplemented by the dried berries and roots that taste of very little, but which fill the stomach and provide something the body needs that meat alone cannot supply. The others begin to stir as the fire grows, as warmth spreads through the cave's interior in its gradual way, never quite reaching the deepest corners, but pushing back the worst of the cold, creating zones of relative comfort that shift and change with the flame's appetite for wood. The child wakes with small sounds, not quite crying but close to it, the struggle of someone too young to understand that this is not punishment, but simply circumstance, that the cold does not target them specifically, but falls upon everything with perfect impartiality. You watch as the child's mother draws them close, wrapping them in her own warmth, murmuring sounds that carry no distinct words but which communicate safety, presence, the assurance that they have not been abandoned to face this alone. The elder rises more slowly, joints stiff from the night's stillness, from the way cold settles into bones and makes them feel older than they are. They move to the fire with small steps, careful of balance, aware of how a fall in these conditions could mean injury that would put them at the mercy of the group's resources, could transform them from contributor to burden, a shift that carries implications no one speaks about directly but everyone understands. You see the determination in how they carry themselves, the refusal to let weakness show more than necessary, and you feel the complicated mix of admiration and sorrow that comes from watching someone fight against time itself, against the diminishment that waits for all of you, patient as the stones. Your partner joins you by the fire, their presence announced by the particular sound of their footsteps, the rhythm you would recognize anywhere. They say nothing. Words are unnecessary for this, for the acknowledgement that you have both survived another night, that you face another day together in this struggle that has gone on so long it has become difficult to remember clearly what came before. What life felt like when cold was merely a season you passed through rather than a condition that defined existence. They lean against you briefly, a contact that shares warmth and something more, something that has no temperature but which you feel nonetheless, and you lean back, completing the circuit, 2 bodies supporting each other in the most literal sense. The morning routine unfolds with the practiced coordination of people who have learned to live in close quarters, who have developed an unspoken choreography that allows movement through limited space without collision, without conflict. Someone tends the fire while another prepares food. Someone checks the cave's perimeter while another sees to the child's needs, roles that shift fluidly based on capability and custom, on the understanding that survival is a collective effort that benefits from each person contributing what they can in the ways they can. You find yourself preparing the morning meal, such as it is, strips of meat set on hot stones to thaw and cook, a mixture of dried berries and ground seeds that will be mixed with warm water to create something approaching porridge. The kind of food that provides fuel without pleasure, sustenance without joy, but which keeps you alive, which is the only criterion that matters now. While you work, your mind drifts to the days ahead, to the calculations that occupy so much of your thinking during these months. The food will last perhaps another moon's cycle if used carefully, longer if supplemented by hunting, shorter if the cold keeps you confined more than expected. The firewood situation requires attention. The supply inside the cave remains adequate, but the stockpile and the protected overhang outside has diminished to a level that will soon demand replenishment, which means another expedition to the distant tree line. Another day spent in the exposed world gathering what you can carry, hoping the weather holds long enough to return safely. The thought of it creates a weight in your chest, not quite fear but a cousin of fear, the awareness of risk that never fully leaves you, that colors every decision with the knowledge that any journey outside might be the one that doesn't end in return. But those concerns belong to the future, even if that future is only hours away. For now, there is food to prepare, warmth to maintain, the small comforts of routine that create islands of normalcy in an ocean of hardship. You watch the meat slowly lose its frozen rigidity, see moisture begin to gather on its surface as heat penetrates its interior, and you think about transformation, about how everything in this season must be changed before it can serve its purpose. Water must be melted, meat must be thawed, cold must be converted to warmth through the alchemy of fire and wood, through through the patient application of knowledge passed down through more generations than anyone can count. The child approaches the fire with cautious steps, drawn by warmth and the smell of cooking, and you notice how thin they've become, how the reserves of fat that rounded their face at summer's end have been consumed by the body's desperate need for fuel, for the calories required to maintain life in these temperatures. It troubles you, this visible evidence of depletion, even though you know it's universal, that all of you have become leaner, harder, reduced to the essential elements of what a person needs to continue. The child looks at you with eyes that seem too large in their face, and you offer a piece of the cooking meat, still too hot to eat comfortably but warm, and watch as they hold it in both hands, feeling the heat seep into their fingers before taking small bites, chewing slowly to extract every bit of nourishment, every particle of warmth. Your partner begins working on a hide that needs attention, scraping away at areas where fat still clings, where the processing that should have been completed before winter is now being finished in these close quarters, filling the cave with the smell of it, with the sound of the scraper moving across the surface in long, rhythmic strokes. It's work that requires patience and care, that cannot be rushed without ruining the material, and you watch their hands move with the confidence of someone who has done this countless times, who knows exactly how much pressure to apply, what angle to hold the tool, when to pause and reassess before continuing. There is something meditative in the repetition, in the way the hide slowly transforms from something rough and imperfect into something that will serve its purpose, will become part of the barrier between skin and cold, will contribute to the possibility of survival. The elder joins this work after a time, their hands less steady but still capable, still holding knowledge that makes their contribution valuable beyond the merely physical. They point to areas that need more attention, demonstrate techniques for dealing with stubborn sections, and you see the way your partner absorbs this instruction, the way knowledge passes from one generation to another in these small moments that accumulate over time to become tradition, to become the collective wisdom that has allowed your people to endure in conditions that should, by all reasonable assessment, be unsurvivable. You finish preparing the food and distribute it according to the unspoken hierarchy that has developed. The child receives their portion first, because growing bodies need what nourishment is available, because protecting the young is protecting the future, even when that future feels abstract, distant, almost theoretical. The elder receives their portion next, an acknowledgement of age and contribution, of the value that comes from having survived long enough to accumulate wisdom. Then the others, including yourself and your partner, portions that are carefully equal, that avoid any appearance of favoritism or preference, because in these conditions resentment can grow as quickly as mold, can poison relationships with the ease of bad water, and maintaining group cohesion is as important as maintaining body temperature. You eat slowly, deliberately, knowing that the illusion of fullness comes partly from taking time, from extending the act of consumption, so that the stomach has opportunity to register what it's receiving, to communicate to the mind that hunger has been addressed, even if not entirely satisfied. The food is neither good nor bad in the way you remember those concepts from easier times. It simply possesses the quality of being edible, of containing what your body needs. And that has to be enough, because enough is all there has been for longer than you care to calculate. When the meal concludes, when the last piece has been consumed and the vessels cleaned and put aside, attention turns to the day's necessary decisions. Someone must go outside to gather wood from the stockpile, to check the snares that were set along the cave's periphery in hopes that some desperate animal might have wandered close enough to be caught. Someone must tend the fire throughout the day, maintaining the careful balance between conservation of fuel and provision of heat. Someone must work on the various maintenance tasks that never end, repairing tools, processing materials, strengthening the entrance barriers, checking the stored supplies for any signs of deterioration. The allocation of these responsibilities happens through a combination of discussion and assumption, of spoken preference and understood capability, and you find yourself volunteering for the outside work, choosing the exposure and risk, because remaining in the cave's confines all day sometimes feels like a different kind of death, a slow suffocation under the weight of stone and closeness and air that has been breathed too many times. Your partner looks at you with concern but doesn't object. They understand this need, have felt it themselves, know that sometimes the danger of going out is preferable to the danger of staying in, which is not physical danger but something else, something that erodes from the inside, that wears away at the part of you that remembers being more than just a mechanism for survival. They help you prepare, layering additional hides around your body, checking that every gap is sealed, every opening covered, because even brief exposure of bare skin can lead to frostbite, to tissue damage that will not heal properly, that will leave you diminished for whatever comes after this winter. If there is an after, which you have to believe there is, have to hold on to as an article of faith more fundamental than anything you've ever believed before. The elder approaches as you're preparing, places a hand on your shoulder with surprising strength, and looks at you with eyes that have seen more winters than yours, that have survived what you're currently enduring, and can therefore testify to the possibility of emergence, of continuation beyond this frozen present. They say nothing, but the contact communicates what words would struggle to express. Be careful, be quick, return safely. Remember that you are valued, that your absence would create a hole in this small community that could not easily be filled. You nod, acknowledging the message, feeling the weight of it settle over you like another layer of clothing. Another thing to carry as you prepare to step out into the cold that waits with the patience of geology, with the indifference of wind. Before you go, you check your tools, the blade for cutting wood, sharpened the previous evening during the long hours when darkness comes so early and lingers so late. The club for defense against anything that might be desperately hungry enough to view you as food. The fire starter wrapped in waterproof hide in case disaster strikes and you need to create warmth quickly, though the likelihood of success in these conditions feels theoretical at best. Everything is secured close to your body, minimizing the risk of loss, of dropping something in snow that would immediately hide it, that would transform a useful object into something irretrievable, gone as completely as if it had never existed. You move to the entrance, and your partner follows, will be the one to seal it after you pass through, to maintain the barrier between inside and outside that makes continued habitation possible. The child watches from near the fire, their expression unreadable, and you wonder what they make of all this, whether they will remember these months when they are grown, whether the memory will be traumatic or simply normal, the way things were during one winter long ago. The elder has returned to their place by the fire, settling in with the patience of someone who has learned to make peace with stillness, with the long hours that must be endured before movement is again required. Your partner begins to loosen the entrance coverings, working from the inside, creating a gap just large enough for you to slip through, and immediately the cold begins to pour in, not entering but falling, pouring like water, like something liquid and alive and hungry. The temperature difference is shocking despite your preparation, despite the layers you wear, and you feel your body respond with an involuntary tightening, every muscle contracting against this invasion, this reminder of what waits outside every moment of every day and night. You don't hesitate. Hesitation is dangerous, allows fear to take root, allows doubt to accumulate, and you push through the opening into the space between the inner and outer barriers, into the transitional zone that is neither sheltered nor fully exposed. Here, in this liminal space, the sound of wind is louder, a constant howl that speaks of forces beyond human scale, beyond human resistance, and you feel the smallness of your existence, the fragility of the arrangements that keep you alive. The outer covering is even stiffer, frozen into shapes that resist manipulation, and you work with your partner to create an opening, coordinating your efforts so that exposure time is minimized, so that the precious heat inside the cave is not allowed to escape more than absolutely necessary. When the gap is sufficient, you push through into the outside world, into the cold that immediately finds every gap in your clothing, every imperfection in your layering, and begins its patient work of extracting heat from your body, of reducing your temperature toward equilibrium with the frozen air that surrounds you. Behind you, the coverings are quickly repositioned, sealed, and you are alone in the white landscape that extends in every direction, that has become as familiar as it is alien, a world transformed by cold into something that bears little resemblance to the terrain you knew during the warmer months. The sun is visible above the horizon now, but its light comes without warmth, a pale illumination that makes the snow glitter in ways that would be beautiful if beauty were not so far down the list of things that matter, if survival were not so completely consuming of attention and energy that aesthetics have become almost irrelevant, almost forgotten. You stand for a moment letting your eyes adjust to the brightness, letting your body acclimate to the cold as much as it can, which is not much, which is never enough. And then you begin moving toward the wood stockpile, your feet finding the path that has been worn by repeated travel, though fresh snow has partially obscured it, requires you to trust memory and landmarks to maintain proper direction. The cold is extraordinary, the kind of cold that feels like physical pressure against your face, that makes each breath slightly painful. that reminds you with every inhalation that you are operating at the edge of what human physiology was designed to withstand. The wood stockpile appears as a dark mass against the white, and you approach it with caution, aware that animals sometimes shelter in such places, that disturbing them could lead to confrontation, to danger that you are not adequately equipped to handle. But nothing emerges as you draw close, nothing challenges your approach, and you begin the work of selecting pieces, choosing wood that is dry enough to burn well, small enough to carry efficiently, avoiding the pieces that show signs of rot or excessive moisture. Your hands are wrapped in layers of hide, but you can still feel the cold of the wood through them, still sense the way heat leaches from your fingers into the frozen material, and you work as quickly as precision allows, knowing that every moment outside is a moment drawing on the finite reserves of warmth your body holds. You make several trips, carrying what you can each time, building a pile near the cave entrance that represents hours of heat, days of survival, though you try not to think too hard about the mathematics of it, about how quickly wood disappears into the fire's hunger, about how many trees would need to be felled to truly secure yourself against the winter's full length. The work warms you through exertion, through the muscular effort of lifting and carrying, and you feel the familiar paradox of sweating in cold air, of your body producing moisture that will freeze if you don't return to shelter soon, that will become a liability instead of the cooling mechanism it was designed to be. When you judge you've gathered enough, when the pile represents a reasonable balance between need and the risk of remaining outside longer, you turn to check the snares, following another barely visible path through snow that reaches past your knees in places. That makes walking exhausting, makes every step require lifting your entire leg high enough to clear the surface before plunging down again into the unstable footing that could hide rocks, holes, any number of hazards that could turn in. Ankle could leave you injured and immobile in temperatures that would kill you long before help could arrive. If help even knew to look, if anyone even realized you were in trouble. The first snare is empty, undisturbed, and you reset it carefully, making small adjustments to its positioning, to the arrangement of the baited trigger. The second snare has been disturbed, but whatever investigated it managed to avoid triggering the mechanism, has taken the bait without paying the price, and you feel frustration mixed with something like admiration, recognition that other creatures are also fighting for survival, are also using intelligence and caution to navigate a world that wants to kill them. You rebate the snare with a precious piece of dried meat, gambling that investment against the possibility of return, and move on to the third location. Here you find success, a small animal already frozen, caught by the snare sometime during the night or early morning, its death quick enough that it didn't escape, didn't damage itself thrashing against the restraint. You feel the complicated emotion that comes with such discoveries, the gratitude for food mixed with regret for the life ended, though that regret is distant, muted, because you cannot afford the luxury of too much empathy, cannot let yourself feel too deeply about the cost of staying alive. You reset the snare and secure the frozen animal to your body, adding its weight to what you must carry, accepting the burden because there is no choice, because everything about survival in these conditions is about accepting burdens, about carrying weight until you simply cannot anymore. The journey back to the cave entrance feels longer than the outward trip, the way return journeys always do when you're tired, when your body has exhausted the easy energy and is beginning to draw on reserves, to burn what should be kept for emergencies. But the cave entrance remains where it should be, and you make the signal that indicates return, the specific pattern of sounds that will identify you as friend rather than threat, that will prevent confusion, disaster, the kind of tragic mistake that could happen when people are scared and confined and desperate. The outer covering opens, and you push through into the transition space, then wait for your partner to open the inner barrier, to create the gap that will allow you back into the relative warmth that feels like luxury after the exterior cold, that makes your face tingle and burn as frozen skin begins to warm. Your partner quickly helps you inside and reseals the entrance, working with practiced efficiency, and you stand there in the cave's interior feeling your body begin to thaw, feeling the deep cold that has settled into your core start to slowly release its grip, though you know it will take time, will require proximity to the fire and warm liquid, and the gradual restoration of normal temperature. The others gather around to see what you've brought, examining the wood with approval, the animal with something approaching excitement, because fresh meat is rare enough now to qualify as fortune, to represent a genuine improvement in your collective situation. The child touches the frozen animal with tentative fingers, seeming to marvel at its rigid state, and you remember that they have lived most of their young life in relative comfort. that these winter months represent their first real understanding that survival is not guaranteed, that life requires constant effort, constant vigilance. You move to the fire and begin the long process of warming, of bringing your body back to something approaching its normal temperature. And as you sit there with the heat gradually penetrating through your layers, you feel the exhaustion that has become so constant you barely notice it anymore, the tiredness that lives in your bones, in your muscles, in the spaces between thoughts. Your partner brings you warm liquid, and you drink it slowly, feeling it spread heat through your interior, feeling your body begin to relax in ways that had become impossible outside, where every muscle had to remain tight, remain ready, remain committed to the effort of staying alive. The animal is prepared for cooking, the process carried out with meticulous care to preserve every usable part, to waste nothing from this gift of protein and fat. The hide will be cleaned and added to your materials, the bones will be processed for tools or boiled for the nourishment they contain. The organs will be consumed first because they spoil most quickly even in this cold. You watch this work happen with the appreciation of someone who understands the skill involved, who knows that the difference between surviving and not surviving often comes down to exactly this kind of competence, this thoroughness in extracting value from every resource that presents itself. While the animal cooks, you work on removing the outer layers of clothing, checking each piece for damage, for moisture that needs to be dried, for any signs that the integrity of these barriers is being compromised. The maintenance of clothing is constant work, requires attention every time you return from outside, because a tear or gap that seems minor in the moment can become life-threatening during the next exposure, can be the small failure that cascades into catastrophic heat loss. You find a small rip in one hide and immediately begin repairing it with sinew and bone needle, your fingers working automatically through the familiar motions, creating stitches that will hold against stress, against the constant abrasion of movement and weather. Around you, the life of the cave continues in its rhythms, people occupied with their various tasks, the child playing a quiet game near the fire, the elder working on what appears to be a teaching demonstration for your partner, showing some technique or method that has served them well over their long years. There is something peaceful about this scene despite the hardship it exists within, something that speaks to the human capacity for creating normalcy, even in circumstances that should allow for nothing but desperation, something that reminds you why survival matters, why the effort is worthwhile even on the days when it feels like too much, when the exhaustion threatens to overwhelm the will to continue. The meat finishes cooking, and another meal is distributed, this one more substantial than the morning's offering, and you eat with genuine hunger, with the body's demand for fuel to replace what the cold has consumed, what the exertion has burned. The fresh meat tastes different from the dried supplies, has a texture and richness that you'd forgotten, and you see the same recognition on the others' faces, the same appreciation for this reminder that food can be more than mere sustenance, can carry pleasure even in these reduced circumstances. After eating, a drowsiness settles over the cave's inhabitants, the natural response to warmth and food and the constant sleep deficit that all of you carry. Some people move to their sleeping places for rest, choosing to surrender to this need, to let the afternoon hours pass in the unconsciousness that requires nothing, that offers escape from awareness. You consider joining them, feel the pull of it, but something in you resists, wants to remain present, wants to occupy these hours with consciousness, even though there is nothing particularly pressing that requires attention, no urgent task that cannot wait. Perhaps it's simply that too much sleep begins to feel like rehearsal for a longer sleep, like practice for the permanent unconsciousness that waits for all living things. And some part of you wants to insist on awareness, on presence, on the conscious experience of being alive, even when being alive is difficult. You sit by the fire watching the flames move in their endless patterns, seeing shapes form and dissolve, finding your mind drifting through memories of other times, other places. You think about summer, about warmth that didn't require fire, about days when going outside meant removing clothing rather than adding it, when water existed as liquid without requiring effort, when food was abundant enough that choice was possible, that you could prefer one thing over another rather than consuming whatever could be obtained. These memories feel distant now, almost unreal, as if they happened to someone else in some other life, and you wonder if when winter finally ends you will be able to return to that other self, or if these months will have changed you too fundamentally, will have carved away parts of who you were to create someone different, someone harder, someone marked permanently by this season of surviving. Your partner joins you at the fire, their work on the hide completed for now, and you sit together in comfortable silence, in the kind of companionship that doesn't require speech, that communicates through proximity and shared experience. After a time, they begin to speak quietly, talking about small things, observations about the day, thoughts about the work that needs doing, plans for tomorrow if tomorrow resembles today, if the weather holds, if circumstances allow for planning. You listen without responding much, appreciating the sound of their voice, the way it creates a kind of anchor to the present moment, prevents your mind from drifting too far into either memory or speculation. The afternoon advances slowly, marked only by the gradual shift of light that filters through gaps in the entrance coverings, by the fire's changing requirements, by the movement of people waking and sleeping and waking again. You tend to various small tasks, repairing a basket that has begun to unravel, sharpening a blade that has dulled with use, organizing the stored supplies so that everything remains accessible, remains orderly, because disorder is a luxury that survival cannot afford, because knowing exactly where everything is can mean the difference between efficiency and wasted effort, between adequacy and shortage. The child approaches you at one point, watching your work with the basket, and you gesture for them to sit close, begin showing them how the weaving works, how the fibers interlock to create structure from strands that individually would be weak, useless. They watch with concentration that seems intense for one so young, and you recognize the look. Remember feeling that same focus when you were learning essential skills, when every piece of knowledge represented increased capability, increased independence. You work slowly, explaining each step, letting them try some of the simpler parts, correcting gently when they make mistakes, praising quietly when they get it right. This transmission of knowledge feels important in ways that extend beyond the immediate utility. Feels like connection to both past and future, like acknowledgement that life continues beyond individual existence, that what you know will outlive you through those you teach. As evening approaches, though determining evening's arrival is more a matter of counting hours than observing light, since darkness comes so early now, the group gradually gathers near the fire, drawn by habit and need, by the social impulse that remains even when so much else has been stripped away by necessity. This is the time for stories, for the verbal traditions that serve as entertainment and education, as connection to history and transmission of values. The elder often speaks during these hours, telling tales of other winters, other hardships survived, other times when continuation seemed impossible but happened anyway, and tonight is no exception. The elder begins a story you've heard before, about a winter in their youth when the snow fell for 30 days without stopping, when the entrance to their shelter had to be dug out each morning, when food ran so short that they survived on strips of hide boiled soft enough to chew. They tell it with the practiced rhythm of someone who has shaped this narrative over many tellings, who knows exactly where to pause, where to emphasize, where to let silence do the work that words cannot. You listen even though you know what happens, listen because the familiar is comforting, because repetition creates a kind of stability, because these stories remind you that others have faced what you're facing, that survival is possible because it has been achieved before by people no stronger or smarter than you. When the elder finishes, others contribute their own stories, memories of different hardships, different challenges overcome. Your partner speaks about a hunting trip that went wrong, about being caught far from shelter when weather changed suddenly, about the desperate race to find protection before cold became lethal. They describe it with careful detail, with honesty about the fear they felt, and you hear in their telling the same thing you heard in the elder's story. The acknowledgement that fear is reasonable, is appropriate, is not something to be ashamed of, but also the demonstration that fear does not have to be paralyzing, that action remains possible even when terrified, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the continuation of effort despite it. When it's your turn, you find yourself talking about the day you went outside to gather wood, about the animal in the snare, about the moment of standing in the cold and feeling how vast it was, how indifferent, how it would continue long after you were gone, and how that thought was somehow both frightening and strangely peaceful. A reminder that your struggles, while important to you, are not important to the universe, which simply continues according to laws that preceded you and will outlast you. You're not sure this story has the shape that others did, not sure it conveys what you meant to express, but people nod as if they understand, as if they've felt similar things, and the child looks at you with those two large eyes and says quietly that they're glad you came back, and you feel something in your chest tighten and release. Feel emotion that you've been holding at distance suddenly become present, immediate, real. The fire burns lower as the night deepens, and people begin to settle into their sleeping places, arranging furs and hides into the configurations that will provide maximum warmth, that will allow the sharing of body heat between those who sleep near each other. You add wood to the fire carefully, building it up enough to last several hours, to provide warmth deep into the night, then move to your own sleeping area with your partner, arranging yourselves in the practiced way that allows both comfort and heat conservation. The child is already asleep nearby, their breathing soft and even, and you watch them for a moment in the firelight, thinking about resilience, about how humans adapt to circumstances, about how this winter that feels so extreme to you is simply the world as this young person is learning it, is becoming their baseline for what life entails. You wonder what kind of adult they will become, shaped by these experiences, and you hope that they will also know easier times, will experience seasons that don't require such constant struggle. But you cannot know, cannot guarantee anything beyond this moment, this night, this continuation of breath and warmth, and the stubborn insistence on remaining alive. You lie down next to your partner, feeling their warmth along your side, and you arrange the sleeping furs over both of you, creating a shared pocket of heat that will make the night more bearable, that will allow sleep to come more easily than it would alone. Their hand finds yours under the furs, holds it with gentle pressure, and you hold back, this small contact carrying weight beyond its physical simplicity, communicating things that neither of you would know how to say even if words seemed adequate to the task. The cave sounds settle into their nighttime patterns, the fires crackling, the occasional shift of someone in their sleep, the wind outside that never stops, that serves as constant reminder of what waits beyond these walls. You listen to these sounds with eyes closed, letting them wash over you, letting them become a kind of meditation, and you think about the day that has passed, about the small victories and the continuing challenges, about the incremental progress towards spring that you have to trust is happening even when it feels like winter will last forever. Your breathing slows, synchronizes with your partner's, and you feel sleep beginning to approach, that gradual dimming of consciousness that will take you into dreams you probably won't remember, into rest that is never quite complete, but which is better than nothing, which allows the body to repair what it can to prepare for the next day's demands. You think about tomorrow, about the work that will need doing, about the wood that will need gathering, about the constant maintenance that survival requires. But these thoughts grow distant as sleep comes closer, as consciousness begins to fade into something else. The fire's light dances against the cave walls, creating moving shadows that transform the space into something fluid, something less fixed than it appears in daylight, and you watch this play of light and dark with drowsy attention, with the kind of unfocused awareness that belongs to the border between waking and sleeping. You think about warmth, about how fire transforms wood into heat, into light, into the conditions that make human life possible in places where it should not be possible. And you feel gratitude for this, for the discovery that happened so long ago that no one remembers, who first learned to create and control flame, who first understood that this could be humanity's advantage, its edge in the struggle against cold and darkness. The last conscious thought you have before sleep takes you fully is simple, stripped of complexity. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough, for now, for this night, and that is all anyone can ask, all anyone can hope for in a winter that tests the limits of what flesh and will can endure. You survived today, and tomorrow you will try to survive again, and that is the pattern, the rhythm, the fundamental structure of existence in these months when continuation is achievement, when another sunrise is victory. Sleep comes finally, deeply enough to offer rest, lightly enough that you will wake if needed, if danger presents itself, if the fire requires attention. And around you the others sleep as well, this small gathering of human persistence, this collective act of defiance against cold that wants to still all warmth, against darkness that wants to extinguish all light, against the indifferent forces that care nothing for your survival, but which you survive anyway, through knowledge and cooperation, and the stubborn refusal to surrender, to give up, to let the winter win. The night continues in its slow way, hours passing unmarked except by the fire's gradual diminishment, by the periodic stirring when someone wakes to add wood, to maintain the barrier of heat that keeps the cave's interior survivable. The cold outside intensifies as it always does in the deepest part of night, but inside the temperature holds, drops some but remains within the range that bundled bodies can withstand, that allows sleep to continue, that permits the rest that makes the next day possible. And in this way, through this pattern of waking and sleeping, of tending and resting, of eating and working and telling stories and sharing warmth, through all of this ordinary extraordinariness, through the daily heroism that requires no recognition because it simply is what living demands, You continue, the group continues, the possibility of spring continues to exist in the distance, not guaranteed but possible. Present as potential, as goal, as the belief that sustains you through the longest night, through the coldest dawn, through all the moments when continuation seems too difficult, but happens anyway. Because humans have always been creatures who persist, who endure, who find ways to survive winters that should by any reasonable measure be unsurvivable. And this winter, your winter, will be no different. Will be another story told in future years around future fires. Will be another demonstration that cold, no matter how profound, cannot entirely extinguish the warmth that humans carry within themselves, the heat that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with will, with determination, with the collective decision to see another spring, to witness another thaw, to remember what warmth feels like and to trust that it will return, that seasons turn, that winter always eventually ends.